We ready? Okay. Welcome everyone to the Microvision Retail Investor Day. We very much appreciate you all joining us today. I know some have traveled far, some are locals. We thank you for coming and joining us. Some of you were here 2 years ago when we did this. We'll have a few words and then feel free to ask your questions. I do want to state that we do not intend to share any material, non-public information today. We will be speaking about things that are already in the public domain. And if we feel like a question is being asked that we can't answer, we will simply say that. So I hope you all understand, as a public company, we do have rules that we need to comply with. We may make some forward-looking statements. Our leadership team, Sumit Sharma, our CEO. Anubhav Verma, our CFO. And Glenn DeVos, our Chief Technology Officer. Thanks so much.
I just want to start off. So we want to keep this very casual. I think we always receive lots of questions, all the way from anxiety, complaints versus encouragement. I want to just have an open conversation. I think we are up here. Any question that you have, I would not. I think somebody asked me like, hey, there's people with the pitchforks and knives here, right? I think it's all fair. We've all put, we put a lot of time into it. You guys have put your money into it. I think if it's a fair question, please ask it, and we'll get.
Thank you. Sumit, you've been the CEO for 5 years now. In that time, what are 2 or 3 of the biggest mistakes you've made? How did you make them? And how did you fix or intend to fix them?
I think I would say that I have underestimated, technology adoption. I think I've learned a lot from, working with Glenn just a very brief amount of time. I think, to create anything, you have to be optimistic. It's always looks like a cliff, right? And any engineer will tell you, you have to be the most optimistic person there. But when it comes to building a business, that enthusiasm has to be metered with realism that things move at a different pace. So even though you're making great progress in technology, I think, very early, you have to start making significant progress on getting some validation, some confirmation that what you're doing, somebody's going to adopt. And hardest thing as a small company is for somebody to give that acknowledgement for you. A company going public with a D-SPAC has different things. And I honestly think that I underestimated that from a get-go, that we have the best technology, we can hire a sales team, enthusiasm, engineers. Of course we're going to win. And it's not that you have the best widget. There's so many other variables that go into picking you, like financials, like your long-term, like how much do they trust management that you guys are going to be around beyond just the contract we're giving them. I think, to be humble, I think I underestimated that, And because it was always like, well, the first one, once I can make my name on that, I can announce it, investors are happy, we can raise enough money, we can become that calm business. But the first one is not like a this, right? It's more like this. It takes a lot more to get the first one, then it gets to a plateau where it becomes a lot easier. I think that's the biggest lesson. The rest, of course, I think, the engineers are here, they can tell you, they work super hard. They do great work. I think even Glenn has complimented multiple times. It's a great team here. But I'm just impatient. It just never happens fast enough, right? I mean, when I was doing engineering, I just had this memory, and maybe it's getting distorted as if like I was a better engineer than I really was. But it just never happens fast enough because, in the role, you always see the market opportunity. Like, you have the opportunity to talk to bankers. You have the opportunity to talk to investors. You see the window that, hey, if I hit that window, that's the maximum benefit I can create for employees and customers and investors, right? But sometimes, the reality of things just take time, and you have to find the right moments to guide people, towards those windows, right? So those are 2 things I would think that lessons that all of us have to learn about, companies.
Thank you.
So, how's it going?
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Good. Are we on? Yeah, probably. So I really want to understand the business better. And from the top down, what are our verticals? What percentage of the business is what? I feel like with all the pivoting and changes and headwinds and this and that, I've kind of lost track of like what the core business is at this moment in time,
Okay.
the active verticals. And maybe we could start at the top, because on the last call, there was a question about, are we a LiDAR company or are we an autonomous systems company? And so you answered that, which is you sell the box to some people, and then there's other people who want the system. So is there anything else at the top at this point in terms of consumer LiDAR, augmented reality, displays, or like what's the top, and to what degree would it be what percentage is the box in terms of sales, and what percentage is the systems in terms of sale?
That's a good question. That's actually a really good question that we need to refresh so everybody, not whipping each other on Reddit, what the reality is. The reality is the way you evaluate that is how the company chooses to spend money. That's the only gauge of where are we spending the money. And we raise money, we owe you an answer of what do we create with the money we've spent so far. That's a fair question, right? Is that a better way to word it?
Let
me word it that way, and then you tell me if I'm off.
We'll nuance it as we go.
Okay. The place we spend most of our money is industrial. We are developing not just LiDAR, which is the MOVIA L. So when we combined with Ibeo, of course, they had a lot of assets built out, but the next sensor, I can tell you this from personal experience, which is now called the MOVIA L, the team had given up on. They didn't think that is going to make it anywhere. They were focusing on the next generation, which we call the MOVIA S, right? But when the acquisition happened, the first thing I said was, no, this asset is something that is unique. We want to monetize this. So we've spent a lot of the money and a lot of the engineering taking MOVIA and making it a production. I mean, there's a production line, but there was a bunch of things that were done wrong that the business would never be sustainable. Mm-hmm. Including redoing the electronics, where effectively the sensor model and the software that enables us with some customers is actually inside. So no longer it's a LiDAR. I don't like to use the word smart LiDAR, right? But it's significantly more valuable than just the word LiDAR anymore.
Well, the industry term right now that you hear everywhere is autonomous systems. I mean, autonomy is making its way through society in every regard, industrial, automotive, robot, I mean, everything. So trying to determine what the value is of our autonomous systems and how much of the company's effort that makes up. Like, and I guess I keep coming back to percentages because it would be valuable. Like, to some people, we are just selling the box, but what percentage of the business is that versus the systems and how our broad view of systems?
Yeah, so I think, help me out here. I think like 60% of what we have spent so far is on the solution, which is the industrial LiDAR with software, approximately, right? And 40% is on Maven to keep us in the play for automotive. So at a high level, let me just compartmentalize them, right? Then let me break it down for you. In the automotive space, and the best person to talk here I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's going to give you color. In the automotive space, I believe that most likely they're just going to want to buy a LiDAR with a clean point cloud, and they will have their own software implementation. Again, that may change in the future, so don't hold me to it, because he's going to tell you about what happens with automotive OEMs, really the monster you're dealing with, right? Not monster, maybe Goliath, right?
Well, just I think everyone understands what's going on with the auto industry right now.
And the industrial space, there's an example that's back there. What they're showing right now is that our LiDAR is beyond that. Our software inside can actually talk to another controller that allows to control a robot, right? That may sound something very, very simple over there that you see, but there's a lot of implementation there. And that's just one application. I think, if there was a very, very successful area to talk about industry, there's other things that we're not showing publicly yet. And we will eventually, right? That will kind of say that, well, this is no longer a LiDAR, now it's a full-blown solution. It's a LiDAR-based solution, so it's got LiDAR software. So the example I gave to some investor was, your iPhone is cute, but without the software is worthless, and the software is nothing without the iPhone. So yes, you go and buy a box, but at the end of the day, you're buying a solution, right? They create the entire ecosystem. There's lots going on in there. So the overall value of our company is not just the box. So LiDAR is just a word, right? It is just a sensing technology. In the space of industrial is our first opportunity to actually go higher up the food chain where we're giving solutions. When we talk about military, and I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions, we'll elaborate on that. We're going to go even higher because those assets already exist. And it comes down to, we don't have to put any more tens and $20, $100 million worth of investment to go compete there because we have some of the building blocks ready. And that's what, I'm going to not steal Glenn's thunder. He should talk about that. Okay.
So is it fair to say we're an autonomous systems company at this point, more so than a LiDAR company, or
The,
is that?
the word we like is, and we haven't branded anything yet, right, is an industrial ADAS company.
Okay.
And there's a nuance to that, right? But
And-
Glenn, maybe you can step in now, right?
And I'm
So-
assuming ADAS applies to not just automotive, but a wide.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe you want to take over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the three verticals that we talk about is automotive, which is the largest addressable market, industrial, which Sumit was just describing, and then there's the defense and DoD vertical. Now, what's interesting, the underlying technology for all three is common. So when we talk about MOVIA L and MOVIA S being developed for industrial, it's still, that base technology still applies to auto. But these markets are looking for different levels of a solution. Auto's looking for very compact, low-cost sensors, easy to package in the car, automotive grade, that can deliver a clean point cloud. Because the OEMs will do their own perception pipeline. So they'll take that point cloud in with radar, with vision, they'll do the perception sensor fusion, and then they'll typically do the features now on top. But that's auto. But that sensor that we talk about is the same technology that goes into industrial. What's different is with industrial, as you see in the example in the back there with MOVIA L, is we provide the perception. So we provide the perception model and the feature that sits on top. So that's a complete solution. Now that's still within LiDAR, so it's one sensing modality. Where we're going longer term is we're going to integrate other sensing modalities. When you do that, now you're talking about a complete system, an autonomous or an ADAS system where you have vision, LiDAR, potentially radar for outside applications, even ultrasonics. That's where you get into now autonomous systems. What we have here is industrial ADAS. And so very similar actually to automotive ADAS. Defense, again, same underlying technologies, but they're multi-sensing modalities, very important, so doing sensor fusion depending on what the vehicle is. ADAS or full autonomy, again, depending on what the mission in the vehicle is. So that's where you're bringing a lot more software content.
Yeah, and I think I understand that, but I guess what I'm driving at, aside from that, is where is the business opportunity right now? Obviously, OEM still has a gestation period. Anything with the Department of Defense is going to take time. It's probably early, what you said, I think you're early with that. So if it's industrial, maybe talk about that opportunity. And this is where I'd like to take the verticals down a little bit further to get a better understanding, because it's my understanding on just a basic level that in industrial autonomy, you got companies like Symbotic that are doing solutions. You got another tier would be with working, with warehousing operations directly. And then you got OEMs, are we implementing directly on forklifts or whatever? So where does the vertical kind of filter down into these various levels of autonomy, and what's the business opportunity for us now? I mean, how are we going to make money with this in the near term?
Yeah, I think if you think about the segments you just described there, they're different models. But I think 2 earnings calls ago, I actually started characterizing them. One of them was, you think about when robots are in a geofenced area, kind of running with no humans, right? They're running more autonomous, but they also need ADAS, right? But again, it's a LiDAR with some software on board. So there's a group of customers, a cohort that you can put into that segment, right? But the solution that you see there, it's a LiDAR with some software inside. They have huge amounts of revenues from their other businesses. But what they're missing is their robots are needing intelligence ADAS again, right? A modality that immediately comes in. And again, what you see back there is something that plugs in and tells you not just give you a point cloud, but also gives you the perception software that, without going to full classification, can characterize what decision a reasonable person or computer should need to take, right? Then you have a segment that you see back there where you have like a forklift. Now there's a human involved. It's not geofenced, but again, it's working like a more traditional ADAS. But again, it's the same solution where it's a LiDAR with different software inside, right? But still building on top of the same perception stack that we have. Did you see it? They are different segments in the industrial space, different cohorts of customers in there, and the same LiDAR, but different versions of the software.
So what's a typical customer path? I'm a customer, I have a unique use case, or I have some unique needs within my warehouse or in my vehicles, which are operating autonomously. How do I reach out to you? What's the process? Like, how do you build those relationships?
We reach out to you. We know our targets. We're not sitting around waiting for the door to be knocked on. We reach out to you. And typically, if I go there, the first thing I ask is like, what's the top 5 problems you got? Just tell me your problems. Don't worry about what the LiDAR does. And why don't we come back with a solution? And then we spend our money, and we get the team to go produce a demo that we come show them right away and see if there's a match. If there's interest or not, then pretty quickly if you're going to move forward. And again, it didn't cost anybody anything. So instead of spending money on marketing all over the world, I think I always get complained that we don't do enough on marketing. That's our marketing, more directed towards the segments and the cohorts that we're targeting. Understanding their problem and demonstrating to them that we can give them a solution in a reasonable amount of time is how I believe we're going to win.
Are you able to give us a number about how many people you reach out to, or is that?
Yeah, I think we said this, right? More than 1, less than 10 is the last thing we said, right? So yeah, but there's,
okay.
Again, these are small investments you have to make. You have to talk to a lot of people. I think, you want to show them something running. Our sales team and our application team goes there. Our software team supports when we can. In a lot of cases, something that we've created for one customer, we can show a lot of different places.
So someone says, yeah, I'm interested. What's the process from there? Can you?
But typically, it's now they have to come up with a program. It's not like, we can invest money and give them a solution. We need integration with them. They have to assign a team. They have to, there's normal steps that anybody would go through, right? They got to put a program together, even if it's a pilot program. And then there has to be some KPIs. As you go through those KPIs, I'm meeting those targets. You're evaluating if they're serious or are they just kind of like exploring. And then, they're funneling down to who the solution provider is going to be, but we're also funneling down of who's really a player, who's just wasting our time. And at some point, you have to say, we can have our application engineers, some engineers support them, but really let's focus our resources on this side because that looks like something that can actually turn over. But the core difference between us and I would say, our competition, which I always get a lot of questions about, after such a long time of patience, after such a long time, we've not raised as much money as they did through their D-SPAC, but we've raised a lot of money, let's be fair. It's time to, if the size of the first deal we announced is not big enough, right, it's not going to be good. Ultimately, the issue is investors, and I'm just being honest, I don't want to offend anybody, with all due respect. Some investors want to just get an announcement, short squeeze happen, trade on it, and move on to the next big thing for themselves in life. We still have to wait and run the business, and we have to give confidence to the customers that we're going to be around, that the team is trustworthy, right? And the board always checks us also, are we actually building a sustainable business, right? What's going to happen if this customer says yes and says a maybe and no? Is it sustainable? So for us, we have chosen to do deals. Let me just finish, Adam. We've chosen to do deals that are not like what you're typically getting from other LiDAR companies because flash in the pan, nothing ever happens. That's a choice, right? So is that a right choice or a wrong choice, right? That will be determined very shortly. But it is the choice we made given the fact of how much capital we had on hand.
Yeah, I actually understand that. I have a different take on it, but I'm going to get to that in a second.
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand. So how far? So we've had clearly some interest. Some people have said yes, more than 1, less than 10. Where are we in that process?
Late stages.
So we're late stages. Yeah. And typically, is there any kind of insight or color you can give us on that process to sort of maybe understand how the industry makes those decisions? Because I think it helps us to understand the technology better from a monetization standpoint. You guys have been great at describing what it is, what it does, what the technology is, where it fits, all different systems, the bot. That's been great. But it's the final stage is getting into monetization, where I'm not quite understanding where we are in that process, how far along people are, and what's actually what's the final corner that needs to be turned with these customers, and how are we getting there?
Let me take that question, Adam. And I think it goes back to the point that how do we determine which of these customers is serious and looking for a longer-term partnership? Because the model is we're not knocking on doors of 100 people and then selling them 5 or 10 or 20 units. It's a different model. So the way we get confidence is we look at the volume projections that they are asking us if we are successful, how we're going to be able to meet their ramp schedule. So that's one of the very key important deterministic criteria for us that shows us how serious this customer is. Because if the customer says, hey, I need 20,000 units tomorrow, I know they're not being real, right?
Right.
So that is one of the factors that tells us, because look, we are a nimble company, so we have to plan our production capacity accordingly that we can meet their ramp schedule. So that is what gives us confidence, the stages that we are in, that we have received these indications from them, hey, this is the volume schedule, and would you be able to meet that? And I think the last part of your question is, where are we now? These are the points that we are discussing / negotiating at this point, that, hey, how would you have this intake, or what would be the take rate of these sensors that we're going to be supplying to you? Because remember, they're not just taking the sensor, they're actually integrating them on their robots, which are then, again, connecting to their main compute software. So it's a lot of things that are going in parallel, along with the tech side, as well as the procurement side, because the procurement side is hammering me that, hey, tell me how you're going to be successful, or what's your plan 5 years, 10 years down the road, et cetera, right?
Well, how does consumption get increased in this model? Are they buying a single set of sensors and that have a long lifespan, or at what
Yeah.
point does that, like,
I think so the product we have is a very high quality product. It was developed for automotive, so it's, I would say, overqualified for the space we're in. So I think, like, your next question, I think you moved on to the next question already, which is like, hey, what's a refresh rate for this, right? I think it's a new space, so you want to come with a very high quality product. You're going to make your reputation, like, what happened with Velodyne early on, right? You don't want any of that stuff. You don't want any of that stink on you, right? So we're lucky in this case that the product was fully qualified, but what we have done now is added more assets, like, come up with the, SoC inside, put the software inside, refresh the product so it is ready for adoption. Does that mean that there's going to be a refresh cycle every 3 to 4 years? Well, you're industrial. Those markets are pretty limited, right? So unless they're growing, we're not going to grow. But let's get that big customer. So the go-to-market strategy is what, Anubhav alluded to, is important. We specifically chose, and we've talked about this over years. I've talked about it also multiple times, that, putting a sales force together, selling 1 or 2 or 3, like Velodyne and Ouster have done, was not in our interest because we just did not have the capital. We did not go public through a de-SPAC, so we did not have that big stockpile to hire that team. So we had to pick this go-to-market strategy, which is you need to go after some really, really big contracts that will take a little bit longer. You have to be patient, but you have to stick with it, because once that happens and you have a certain volume, a certain inertia of your technology out there, and it's very high quality, and the real value of the company could be stabilized, and it would probably plateau at a much higher level than all the volatility from some of the other companies. At least that's the thesis. Now, or the hypothesis, right? But I want that thesis to be done once we actually, announce something. And of course, it's not just us; it's our board, it's our, banking partners, it's everybody supporting that we vet this with, right? So I mean, as investors, sometimes you feel like, we don't share that, unless you sign an NDA and you're not going to trade on the information. Of course, then we can talk about it. But as public company figures, we have to talk about really where we focus our go-to-market strategy is specifically for a bigger whale. You need that. And that's when you get to a point of the points that Anubhav made and Glenn have made. It is time, in my opinion, to push the chips in, because there's a handful of partners. They seem legitimate. They have a real problem. We can solve it. We're at the right place at the right time. Our cost structures are great, so we're not trying to sell them something that's thousands of dollars. They're starting to see, like, real value for them as well from the get-go. It's a very mature company. It's something that I believe that you guys are going to be proud of, actually. I think these choices were tough, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, I'm an investor, right? It's not, beyond just shares in the company, I've invested my life force into it, right? So I feel much more confident that we are on the good precipice.
Well, I want to give everybody else a chance.
Yeah.
I'm hogging, but one last point, and that is, you keep saying patience. People are not patient. I think it's more frustration than patience. Yeah. And just some feedback. Frustration is an effect. It's not a cause. And when I think about why I may or may not be frustrated at certain times, I keep coming back to information. And I think there's been a lot of times over the past few years that we've either been incorrectly or inadequately given information, and there's long stretches of time. And I think if there's one area that is vital to improve on, is to have a better connection with shareholders, maybe create some mechanism to do more regular communication with investors, whether it be more regular fireside chats. Maybe you have an Ask Us Anything page on the website, something that connects people, connects investors to the company in a way that really has been lacking for quite some time.
Yeah, I think going back to the first question, right? I'll just say this is the thing that I've learned, right? I mean, I think I'm a pretty charismatic person, right? But maybe not enough. There's more flair needed. I think I have, tend to be more conservative on, instead of whipping up everybody with, a lot of information, perhaps adding some other way to do it. So that's point taken, right? I think that's but that's more of a personality issue with me, like more conservative as in say something when there's something to say instead of just, flapping your lips, right? But certainly, you guys have been very, very patient and very, very trustworthy, right? So it's important that, but sometimes, to be honest with you, we're so afraid. I mean, Drew's standing there staring at me right now. We're always afraid of like, are we giving too much color? Because again, Microvision, and some of you have been around for Microvision a long time, right? We have a former employee who's still an investor here, right? He's staring at me. So, great supporter of the company. The company used to be different. In the last 5 years, it's been different, right? But there's always room for improvement. And I acknowledge that, we have to find a way to communicate without feeling pressured in just having something to say, right? And that's just, to be honest with you, it's the persona of the company. Our board is conservative. We tend to be more like a normal business where partners, what I've discovered is not just what we talk to investors. In partner meetings, they do read our earnings call. They will watch the video on YouTube, and they will kid us about something when we go meet them, right? So you have to not just be cautious about what is, what you're discussing with investors, but you have to think about what I'm saying here, what he's saying. They can spin around on back on us, right? So we have to be extra cautious. This is the truth. I'm just being very, very honest with you guys, right? So it's not that we're trying to not be open. I think I'm very open. If you ask an honest question, you're most likely going to get an honest answer. But it's not, we're cautious about what somebody may perceive. That it's not all NDA, right? It's about what they may perceive, are we taking them for granted, right? So we're trying to represent a more balanced approach to everybody, not just our employees that know a lot, our investors, but also our customers. Okay? Yeah.
I have an easy one for you. So first of all, thank you for doing this. It's an opportunity for investors and to sit down and kind of pick your brains a little bit. But on the Q1 earnings call, you gave revenue guidance of 30 to 50 million for industrial only in 12 to 18 months. The part that we're missing is what's the starting date for the 12 to 18 months? Was it May for the earnings call? Was it January 1? Can you give a little light on that?
Sure. So first, let me clarify that, technically we did not give guidance. It's an estimated range of what the order or the demand could look like, because that's what we're planning on the production side. Because I think it's like you have to balance both sides of the equation. What we're seeing or what the demand we are expecting from these customers and how are we planning for it. So the 30 to 50 million represents that revenue will be the range of revenue that we expect to hit. Now, timing and revenue is an accounting issue. Why I say that is because revenue is recognized, not going into technical, is when the devices are accepted by the customers, because that's what the US GAAP rules say. Now, this is where the negotiations, as I described earlier in my comments, are still underway, because they are internally telling us that, or planning as to when do they accept or they plan to accept the sensor orders that they can themselves integrate them into their fleet. And that's why it's very hard for us at this point in time to say revenue is going to start at this point and is going to end. Unfortunately, it's not as simple, right? Because in a typical contract with, for example, an automotive OEM, what you get is a backlog. What you get is, okay, every month they're going to consume X sensors, barring some factors which may or may not happen. But typically, they give you a very exact schedule because they know how many cars are getting out of their factory every month or every day. That's why it's easier for when you have a business with those kind of customers. Here, we're dealing with some industrial customers, this is a new technology for them. As they are integrating these devices into their ecosystem, they are themselves going through these iterations as to when will the rollout exactly happen. Hence, I wanted to shy away, and maybe that's the word, because ultimately, when I have more visibility and guarantee, that's when I can technically go and say, hey, this is my revenue guidance because I know what I am expecting as POs or an MSA, whatever be the case, that I know exactly when I'm supposed to hand you these devices and when are you going to consume it. That's the difference why it's hard for us to quantify the exact start date and an end date of this 30 to 50 million range.
But over the period of time that he's already mentioned several times, right? We believe within that period of time, that's the range that we believe is possible.
Because that's what we have planned for. That's why we have already committed to producing that with our partner at ZF, because we wanted to assure the customer that we're going out of your way and say that, hey, we're going to be able to meet your demand, but you have to give us the exact schedule, because obviously these sensors can't be made tomorrow. There's going to be a lead time in procuring some of the items that go into the sensor. So it's all about production planning and making sure we're meeting the commitments that the customer is asking of us.
I have a couple. One is regarding the stock price. I've been a trader for a long time with Microvision. I'm still hanging in there, but I remember making some trades that were $26 a share. I'm worried about the low price and whether you're expecting a reverse split again to meet the requirements of the New York Stock Exchange.
We have not, as you know, in the proxy, that's not a proposal that we put. As you know, in the current proxy, that's not a proposal we put forward. So we're just focused on what you see in the proxy, and continue working hard to execute.
The second question is...
You want to add something to that?
Yeah, can I add something to it, right? Because, and again, maybe you're a trader, you might appreciate this somewhat better. Because I think the way Microvision is positioned as a company is over the last, I'm going to say 8 to 9 months, the ADTV, or the average daily trading volume, has significantly been higher. Now, you can argue that, hey, that's okay, but the stock has not really gone up or shot up, right? Yes, I know everybody wants, I too want the stock to go up, right? But I think it's important for us to be mindful of why this ADTV higher is a very important element of the story. Because in a natural progression of any company, you ultimately move on to have long-term institutional investors. So look at any big public company, the float is much smaller, and the bulk of the shares are actually controlled by or traded by big institutions like Fidelity, T. Rowe Prices of the world. They have a very specific criteria for investing in companies like that. And that criteria is liquidity. How liquid the stock is so that they can choose that security as their investment, besides the fundamentals of the business, because that's one criteria that goes into their investment thesis. So that's why I think I wanted to point out that, yes, while the stock may not have been at the levels you want or I want, the ADTV rising is essentially an indicator of where the stock is going, because it's gradually having more eyeballs. The more eyeballs means is it's almost like if you bring in revenue or commercial deals, the response to the stock will be asymmetric. Why? Because you have too many people or too many investors looking at the stock, which are actively trading in the stock on no news. Imagine when you have a commercial news, the stock price reaction becomes asymmetric. So that's why it's very important for us as a management team to improve the visibility of Microvision stock amongst all investors, retail as well as institutional investors. So hope that clarifies the point that, yes, while we may not be at the levels we want it to be, but the ADTV rising is a very significant indicator of what's to come.
The second question is regarding technology is moving so fast in these days. I grew up when it was analog. Everything was analog, and I worked for a company that made great equipment. But all of a sudden, it changed to digital communications across the nation, and they didn't have a product, and they went down. So I imagine you guys are really trying to look forward to what's going to happen. So far, automated cars, I think, are a long ways off, but I'm really interested in the industrial side of it. I think that's a bigger market. But my question is to you, Elon Musk, you know him. He's talking about having commercial robots for home use in a couple of years. Is there any talks with him to be able to put your equipment, your sensor equipment in the robots that are just over the horizon?
Glenn, you want to start with this one?
Sure. Maybe a couple comments. One is technology continues to move quickly, and I think for microvision in particular, as it relates to LiDAR technology, what I think is really great is we're already at an all-silicon solution. So if you think about how technology kind of migrates, it goes from analog, electromechanical, more electronic, and ultimately digital. And really what that means for us is going all wafer level or silicon level processing and silicon level construction. What that brings you isn't just performance, it brings you the ability to drive costs down as you scale. So unlike an electromechanical LiDAR that has a motor and mirrors or spinning elements, when you're processing wafers, it's a much more cost-effective and a cost-reducible technology. And so Microvision's positioned for the future in terms of where the technology is going. And we're not electromechanical, we're not mechanical, we're basically all digital already. And so that's really good. I think in addition, you asked about robots or cobots. We're looking, that's part of that industrial space that we're looking at in terms, it has many different subsections to it. Part of it is, AGV, automated guided vehicles, autonomous mobile robots. Part of it is cobots and how you operate those cobots with people around. So, in fact, just the other day, talking to a company that does automation in hospitals. So moving material through hospitals with automated robots that help do that. And so our technology has really nice applicability to those other markets as well.
I just thought of one more. I wanted to ask, how dependent is your equipment on supplies from China? So much of the software chips and stuff are developed in China. I'm just wondering how much.
As you said in the last earnings call, we don't have any exposure to the China trade. As I said in the last earnings call, we do not have any exposure to the China trade or tariff. Yeah. I think Ty, yeah. You have to move up, Ty.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Dave. I wanted to know if you've ever had a conversation with Palmer Luckey.
I have not.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, ask a question, I'm going to give it, right? So be careful what you
have
ask.
Have you ever texted or emailed with him? So,
I think, guys, I think like we joke around, but I think you have to be careful if there's opportunities out there. You don't want to, like the example I gave was Luminar announces they have something with Tesla, and a tweet comes out because somebody got angry and it probably killed an opportunity. So, self-inflicted wounds. I mean, let's just focus on the companies talked about publicly, right? We will be open about it, right? I think the rest of it is you can ask the question, right? But we're not being obscure. We're not obscuring anything. If it's not in the best interest for all of us to ask that, we're going to try to reword the question for you. Like sometimes we get, on the earnings call, we get questions from you that I say, nobody should ask this. So we try to reword it softly and we, sort of like the way you should really ask it. So I think the best way to answer that is whatever opportunities are out there, right? We have assets. If there's anybody out there that we can do a partnership with, if they want to acquire that, if they want to do anything, we are always open for that. We're a public company. Right, so our opportunity is we're focused on revenues and building a sustainable business, and find partnerships where we can. We have assets built out, so we're not in R&D. Right, a lot of things you see. I mean, I'm openly said it. I'm not really sure after we make the Movi S, Maven, what do we have to do? Everything that we're going to invest R&D in the future is what Glenn's talking about. It's beyond LiDAR. So the parts of the company that you're used to so far, the whole of the company I think is more valuable. And that's the purpose of this, very long day today. So, really get comfortable with where the vision is going forward, because with all the blocks they're already building out, them by themselves are not finding partnerships. But Glenn's got a vision that I think is very, very refreshing, and nobody in this space, and so the company long-term is much more valuable. I mean, the name Microvision comes from micro display technology from 30 years ago. Right now it's a LiDAR company. The name is the name, but where I think he intends to take it, I think I'm super excited about. So specifically for a name for a customer or a CEO, I think that's more on Reddit. You guys want to whip each other up, but we're not going to talk about that, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Good. So I'll be fair here. I got a question for each of you.
Okay.
So Anubhav, going back to that 30 to 50 million of demand, and thank you for the explanation of how that may or may not translate into revenue, and that's hard to predict. But is that 30 to 50 million, I know you said 12 to 18 months, and I know those are just estimates, right? Is that the potential aggregate demand of your full sales pipeline that you're looking at today? Or is that more of the demand that you would expect that people would sign? Not necessarily revenue, but sign those deals.
That's a great question. And I think two parts to it. The 30 to 50 million number is actually really only from the industrial piece. Because what we have not factored into what the potential revenue opportunities, which I described in the Q1 earnings call, could be from the defense sector as well. Let's just call it defense tech, for example. And it also doesn't account for any revenues that can be generated in the automotive. We know that it's not going to be big numbers, but there can still be. So that's something which we haven't quantified, but we're actively pursuing. So I just wanted to make it clear.
I just meant the industrial. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
So,
Yeah, just the
so
industrial.
I just want to make sure that 30 to 50 million is in that piece. Now, I think the second question is, that's what, and why the range? The range is because it's dependent on the pricing and the volume discussions which are actually in negotiation with these customers as we speak. So that's also why we want to be very cognizant of the fact that what we have internally planned for in the next 12 to 18 months are production commitment from ZF. It's almost tied back to what we can produce is what we have ramped up that production so that we can meet the demand that has been put forth by these customers. Because we're not making up these numbers, as an example. So we have been given that, hey, can you make these number of units and provide us in the next 12 to 18 months? That is the inbound customer volume trajectory that we're working off of.
So my question is, though, is that the full pipeline? Like if you close all the deals that you're looking at would be 30 to 50? Or is that just a reasonable, ratio of that pipeline to say, well, we're not going to win every deal?
Yeah, no, I think it's a reasonable ratio. Obviously, we're not going to win everything, but I think this is based on high confidence because going back to Adam's point, how many people do we feel confident with? Because some people will give you numbers that do not make sense, but they're still engaged. So we have to gauge, and this is where business judgment comes in, right? So you have to be anticipating what is the realistic volume scenario that we can commit to and deliver, and that's what the 30 to 50 million represents.
Okay. There was some discussion on your earnings call, and then there was some debate on Reddit about the capacity. It was in December, you did an 8K for capacity increase. There was, in my mind anyway, an increase in capacity that you engaged with ZF on, an agreement. And then there was a question about, I think it was confusing. I think it was Casey who said, okay, did you increase in capacity again?
Yes.
And Sumit said, no,
Yes.
we didn't.
Yes. So
But
maybe
it was for this, you meant not for the first time capacity, because you did increase capacity the first time.
Correct. So let me clarify that.
Yeah,
Great
okay.
point, Ty. The reason that question came up was in part because of my prepared remarks. In my prepared remarks, I had mentioned that at this point, we are seeing more demand coming from our customers. And at this point, we're not able to meet that based on our existing production commitment. So if those orders or if those contracts, negotiations go to the later stages, we may, and in fact, we would need to add capacity to our production schedule. That would mean that we'll have to invest in another site. Because obviously, given that we want to make, as we get higher volumes, we can even offer lower prices to our customers. And for that, you obviously need to have in some kind of upfront investment to ramp up this capacity schedule. That's what I meant, that we are seeing signs, but again, at this point, we can't commit because nothing has been inked yet.
And I think you said it was at the top end of that range. If you get to that sort of maybe 50 million-ish
That
range,
is
you might
correct.
have to.
That
Now,
is
why
correct.
another site? Why not another shift on the existing?
So of course, I'm more operational, right? So when I talked about capacity in that comment, I have a production line that has capacity of 43,000 units a year, okay? But if I run it at 10,000 units a year, that's the capacity, that's the actual proven out. So the takt time is based on that, right? It's getting super techie. But that machine can produce 43,000 a year. So now we do our ramp to get to the next level. So the reason, we're spending money, again, the reason the 8K was filed is it's material change in what we had said, right? We're about to go make a commitment. It's important for people to know, right? So therefore, that same production line, you increase capacity, right? Now, given, like when Anubhav was saying, there could be another site. I think this is where once you run something, you have to run at a certain yield, certain OEE. There's numbers. You have to hit certain price points. We're doing it in France. You have to start looking at long term. If you have to unlock more value for your customers, for your investors, what makes the most sense? You can certainly do more of in the same site, but at some point, think about the volume numbers we're talking about. These are non-automotive volumes. It's industrial. I don't think you can go on an earnings call with Ouster and ever hear about a volume like that from anybody, right? And we're saying there's multiple opportunities that we're going to try to harvest from that, right? The prudent thing would be that you want to sort of divest yourself from just one site because, we're not like Apple and Foxconn, everything can be one place. You really have to think about, I need to divest myself from some risk.
Just from a risk
Standpoint, it's the same production line, it's the same product. It's going to be for multiple years. I'm better off bringing on a second site and different. And if I can, as Anubhav mentioned, if I can provide a benefit to my customer, closing deals, price is always, right? We can talk about tech all we want, right? As an engineer, all of us, we get excited about it. But I think, Glenn can talk a lot about it, like, the cutthroat business of automotive. The number one always is not, right, Glenn? I mean, price is always going to be number one in everybody's mind. What problems you can solve at what price point. So, divesting ourselves, from one site, I mean, again, ZF is going to hear this, but they've heard this from us, is this makes the most sense for us long term, right, to protect our business.
Okay, good.
Same manufacturer, just a different site?
That's not been talked about. That's what we have not said.
Tier one?
What's that?
Are we talking about a different tier one altogether? When you say a second site?
I think ZF was something that Ibeo had partnered with. There was a production line in place. We took over the relationship, right? So it's a tier one. Most likely, since it's industrial and it's non-automotive, we can explore other things where the cost structures are even more beneficial just having a contract manufacturing relationship with somebody else, right? But again, it's a game time decision. If somebody else wants to fund the line and save us some money and it happens to be tier one, fine, we'll do that. But we haven't talked about that, Mike. What we're saying is that we do expect that longer term, if we are successful, not winning everything, but a chunk of them, we are going to need additional capacity added. And most likely, it's not going to get added in the same site. And it's not a second shift because you do want to take the opportunity to secure your de-risk for long term.
Good answer, yep, understood. Glenn, question for you. Now, you're relatively new to the company. I know you've maybe talked to Sumit in the last 6 months or so, but you joined, what, a month ago or 2 months ago, maybe?
Beginning of April.
Okay. So sensor fusion, right? And Microvision made a decision to invest in sensor fusion, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and then through austerity reasons, backed away from that. Now it sounds like it's back on, right? Multimodal, I think, is a new word, but sensor fusion. So my question is, what is the architecture for that? In other words, I can't imagine you're going to send radar data and camera data to the LiDAR box. So is there another box? Whatever. Yeah, what's the architecture of that sensor fusion?
So typically you need, essentially you just need to provide processing capability that can ingest the signals or the streams from the different sensors. And there's two ways of doing sensor fusion. You can do it with raw data, so that's called low-level sensor fusion. You can do it with object-level data, that's higher-level fusion. Now, either approach still requires that you have a processor that's capable of managing that task. Now, with normal satellite sensors or not like the movie L, you don't have that processing capability on board. In fact, within industrial today, if you look at all the different suppliers, Ouster, SICK, et cetera, they don't have that processing capability. Movia L does, though. It has an SoC inside that's able to not just do the processing of the point cloud, but actually can support doing fusion inside the box. So you don't need a separate box. So we could potentially simply provide the connectivity from the camera or from the radar back to our product and do that task inside of the sensor. That's why it's an intelligent sensor that has that processing capability. You can also choose, hey, I want to do that centrally. So I don't want to put that in a sensor. I don't want to have a sensor that does that. I want to do it in a central ECU. That's very common. And so you can do it that way as well. But it would still be our software running in that ECU and potentially our ECU that performs the sensor fusion function. And then, the environmental model back to the system.
So the architecture is one of those two options, essentially,
Yeah.
right? It just seems odd that you'd send radar and camera data over to a LiDAR that's sitting on the front left bumper of the car or something.
Yeah, but that's where you don't think of it as just a LiDAR sensor. It's a LiDAR sensor that happens to have on board a lot of processing capability. And so, you're taking advantage of that processing capability.
And then who's the buyer of that sensor fusion?
That can be a number of different things. If you're dealing with an OEM, the equipment manufacturer, they would be the buyer that would basically bolt that system onto their platform.
In industrial?
In industrial.
Industrial.
Yeah, that's what we're talking there is very much more in industrial or commercial vehicle where they don't have the engineering capability to do that whole system development. They're looking for more bolt-on solutions that don't require them to re-architect the vehicle. They can just kind of bolt it on, connect it to the vehicle, and be operational.
From the comments on the call, it also seemed like military applications might be part of that sensor fusion.
Yeah, for some. Okay. I mean, you're going to get people in defense that have a lot of engineering capability. You're going to get some that that don't. They're a vehicle manufacturer. They're not a software company.
Before I move on, it's again, like I always say, like there's an angle of that question that you should ask that's actually even a smarter question, right? Okay. What's the compute inside? This magical compute, right? You just saw back there that the LiDAR sensor is still only consuming 7.5 watts. So it's not a GPU-based solution. So there's some real value there. You have this low-power sensor with this incredible amount of compute that allows us to, this is, again, we gauge progress based on how many POs we're getting, how many partnerships we're signing, right? But this was one of those incremental progress that we made. We really have figured something out that allows us to have a huge advantage long term. There's a cost advantage, but really power is always going to be big. So this is not like we threw like a big old Jetson something inside and we're fishing. No, this is actually a well thought out product with huge amount of compute.
Fair enough. So this is a futuristic question. I guess I would imagine that in the relative near term, and I don't understand it takes a long time to build this stuff, right? But that it would be third-party radars and cameras that you would ingest data from. But would Microvision? But then that seems like that might be hard. I don't know. But would you ever envision Microvision making radars and cameras, or is that just not something that makes any sense?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah, you should. He's an expert at it, so he can definitely start.
Partnering is typically the best first step to that because there are already many good camera manufacturers for industrial, for automotive. My former company, Aptiv, we made 8, 12, 3-megapixel cameras. We also made a full range of radar products. So partnering is a much faster way of getting to market, getting the system ready to go. And without having to make a huge engineering investment in developing those products ground up. And their radar and cameras, I would say, are fully commoditized.
So the interface for radar and cameras would be close enough that you don't have to develop like a bunch of different specific, this radar we have to integrate. You can develop generic.
Those are standard. You can get them over automotive Ethernet. You can get them over CAN. You can get them over CAN. So all the typical protocols are supported. So that's not an issue. It's just a matter of picking which one is best for the application, and then you just have to manage the interface to it.
Okay. Good, thank you. Sumit, question for you. So you've stated multiple times, right? You've spent more time in AR than you have in LiDAR, right? Which might change here in a few years, who knows, right? Recently, I think there's been an uptake in the interest in the community, in the media, and Apple and Meta and AR glasses and other devices that are somewhat similar. You have said, MicroVision stands by, ready to openly support the industry when needed. But why do you think those companies aren't reaching out to MicroVision for any help yet?
I think it's early times in AR still. After so many years and billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars into it, it's still early times. And I'm not pessimistic about that because that's where I cut my teeth. The physics of that is really interesting. But what's really challenging is the human interface. And for somebody who's got eyesight issues, right? And even if you have perfect 20/20 vision, it is a very challenging medium to absorb. Getting a pair of glasses, AR glasses that you feel you're comfortable with, there's lots of things to be solved. And a lot of it is in the waveguide. So it's not how you inject the image inside, right? You need something adaptive. They're using LED arrays right now. Really, they're limited on lumen. Ultimately, you're going to need some edge-emitting lasers. Then you're going to go back to the MEMS again. So ebbs and flow of technology, but the problem is on the waveguide.
So this interest is still early times. Even though there's interest and there's things moving, it's...
He said multiple times that you think about automotive LiDAR, where they have built millions of cars, is early times, right? AR is even more early times.
Okay.
And of course, one of our board members who spent 35 years of his life on this space, and he would even say, oh yeah, it's early times.
Okay.
Because that's there, right? Can we pass the mic on this side, I think, just so we can, I don't want these guys to feel like that, they picked the wrong side.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Get the mic. You've been clear, and thank you for this meeting. You've been clear, 30 to 50 million, more than one opportunity, less than 10. With the share authorization before the company, are there one or more prospective companies in the pipeline that have said, we will execute a purchase agreement if those shares are authorized?
I'm going to give the way this question is asked probably is problematic, right? But I'm going to answer it, and then you can come back and rebut, right? All right. Think about proposal 2 and proposal 3. It's not something that I imagine or he imagined. The board has thought a lot about it. The chairman of the board sits right there. You can certainly talk to him. These are the tools the company believes that they need to execute what's ahead of us. Because lots of things can come in our way, right? So that's put out in the proxy with that intent. It'd be inappropriate for me to say if anybody specific says anything, then that's what's in there, right? So I think just think about them as these are the tools that the company believes they need to be successful. That's the most fair answer I can give, okay? Without Drew shaking her hands like, shut it down, right? So I think, in any proxy, I think it's not something that is done lightly. I think we go through a deep amount of debate with all the opportunities, which ones we believe, which ones we don't believe, what's the outcome, what people are saying versus, what we believe could happen, and what's the best way possible for us to protect, right? The interests of the shareholders, employees, and customers.
Okay, I'll just ask a quick follow-up and then hand the mic over. And thank you again. I've been here since '98, so voted on a lot of these share authorizations. I'll just ask very open, what's different this time?
Yeah, I'll be 52 this year. I don't know what you think about me, right? You're some age, he's some age, right? We're investing a lot of our life force into this. So I assure you, just collecting a paycheck is not my intent. I want us to be successful. I want personally myself to be successful. So the authorization for the share is not so, we can keep just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That is, if you know anything about me, right, that's not, the ambition I have for myself or for the company or for you, okay? The best way to describe it is, the company, we have value, we have to extract it, but it's not just to sell shares, raise money, and just collect a paycheck. That's just not who we are as a company. That does not motivate our employees. I'll be honest with you. These guys are really smart. They can go work someplace else. So they see something of value here that it will be a really fun company if everything that we're talking about now, right, everything that we're talking about now with Glenn, we always wanted to do. We just had no means of doing it. We never did, right? We have actually an investor here sitting there. He probably doesn't want me to call him out because he's very humble, but he's a former employee. He's been known this company for what, Yari, how much? 17, 18, 20 years, right? Yeah, so I think we've always had this ambition. And what's different about us is like we just don't want to keep turning the wheel, raising capital, and keep going on. We want to get something done that's meaningful to all of us. That's the best way I can describe it to you.
And if I may add,
Yeah.
I certainly don't have that history, for over 27 years. What I'll tell you in the last, why now? Like, what's different now? In the last, at least 4 years, I have joined this company, where I see this company, where it has come, where the industry has. What I'll tell you is an investor committed $91 million of capital in the history of the company. That happened in the last 8 months. Second proof point I would give is what I describe as the average daily trading volume. Our visibility is increasing or has already increased significantly. Point number 3, we are able to attract people like Glenn, and we're able to have these accomplished people on our board member who are actually guiding the future of this company. Number 4, what has also changed is the landscape. 5 years ago, there were perhaps 14 LiDAR companies. Now you can count them on your single hand, which are actually going to make it. So this share authorization is actually positioning us to be the last man standing, because I keep reiterating the real value of why we're here is because this company has the chance or has the shot to be the last man standing and command that scarcity premium that would automatically start to kick in if you are the only guy left. And for that, you have to make right choices along the way. It's not a crash and burn. It's not a flash in the pan. And I think that's why it's important to start behaving as a traditional public company where the number of shares, because obviously the number of shares authorized doesn't mean that they're going to be diluted tomorrow. It represents what is the healthy proportion of outstanding shares versus the authorized capital that will actually entice the institutional investors to also start looking at the stock. So it's all because we're not thinking in terms of getting this one deal done, because that's not the point. The whole point is preparing the company for that persona which it needs to attract that people or to attract that party which will take it to the next phase or the next leap. So hopefully that clears, at least I am very proud of where MicroVision has come in the last 4 years in terms of, the visibility and just the stats of, look at our team. How many, at what point did MicroVision had such good quality of engineering pool, talent pool, not just in the US, but across Hamburg too. So that's why I'm more confident and I'm more positive what we can do where we are today at this juncture of time.
Maybe I can add, because I don't even have 4 years of history. I've got about 7 weeks, plus a few conversations with Sumit. But it gets to the same point. Why take that step? Why join MicroVision? And for me, it was having spent 3 decades in automotive and doing high complex systems integration work. I think MicroVision for point one has the technologies and the solutions that automotive needs. Where automotive is today, it's not really on a successful path for level 3 in how it's applying LiDAR. It's stumbling and having some real issues with that. MicroVision has technologies, I think, that can unlock that market. And the approach between the short-range solid-state flash LiDAR, along with MAVIN, the MEMS-based LiDAR, puts us in a really interesting position for that market. And that's what we're going to drive. Now, that'll take time. So with time, you need the resources to be able to support that. But I can tell you the OEMs are looking for those solutions. We can provide them. The second is industrial, though, is now. And what you're seeing there with Movia and the work that the team is doing, that's another great opportunity. I mean, it really is, and where we can take the assets we have and go attack that market. I think we can approach it from a different direction than traditionally how it's been approached by some of the incumbents, and kind of help industrial on that journey from analog to digital that we talked about. Industrial, in many respects, is still back in analog, maybe a little bit of electromechanical. We can advance that, and so that's really exciting. And then DoD, I mean, that's for me, that's an opportunity on top of those others. So I think it's not different for me because I don't have the history, but what's exciting for me is to have an opportunity with Microvision to really drive those three verticals and drive with speed. I mean, it is all about moving quickly.
Hey, Glenn, could you expand on what you see Maven? Because I don't have the background for Maven, neither does the industry. But when you say Maven, automotive industry is something, do you see something in Maven that I don't know? But could you expand on that?
Yeah, if you think about Maven, maybe to describe it at a high level, it's a MEMS-based scanning product, right? So it has, and MEMS is a very mature technology. That's a technology that Microvision has years of experience with. And it's essentially an all-silicon solution. And so when you think about auto, and you think about level 3 needing LiDAR, it's about how do I provide long-range detection for the vehicle along with short range. Where Maven plays is having a very efficient and a lower power way of delivering that long-range perception. And doing it with an all-silicon solution. So not spinning a mirror, not doing any of that. And as a time-of-flight technology, it's using, I think, much more commoditizable constituent technologies or components, basically. It's time of flight, again, mature technology. And so it's that combination of Microvision's expertise with MEMS, our ability to produce MEMS and control them efficiently, along with the time of flight approach to the system. That means we can bring the cost of that solution down and still provide what auto needs for basically long-range detection. And I don't look at Maven by itself. I always look at it in combination with other sensors, in particular the Movia short-range sensors.
So it's been ready now for a couple of years. What is the stumbling block? If we're ready now, we can combine the sensors.
Yep.
Why isn't automotive adopting us now?
Because I think automotive, if you think about the journey auto has taken with regard to level 3 perception, it's primarily been driven by the German OEMs and primarily looking at use cases, high-speed use cases. So traveling on the Autobahn, looking at, approaching vehicles at high speed, which has driven or approaching objects on the roadway at very high speed, 200 kilometers per hour. That drives a very, very specific set of requirements for small object detection at a distance with low reflectivity. Think about a piece of a tire sitting on the Autobahn that you got to detect. That in turn has driven and the auto industry has looked at it, we want one sensor to do all of that. So now you have to have one sensor that can see broadly, that can see wide field of view, but also detect at a tremendous distance. And my point is, and what that's resulted in is not very effective penetration, a very expensive sensor, and very limited take rates for the market, in fact, and really it hasn't been working that well for the automotive OEMs. And really what they need to think about is kind of what we did with radar. We don't use one sensor fits all or one sensor. I have a specific need for a long-range detection. I'll optimize a sensor to do that. I have short-range detection needs. I'll use sensors that are optimized around that. By doing that, I can bring total system cost down. But that wasn't the approach the OEMs took initially. They were looking, hey, we want a long-range sensor that takes care of everything. And that's not what the industry was really, that's not what the industry has necessarily offered. Now, 2 years ago, with the acquisition of Ibeo, that gave Microvision the full sensor suite. And so that's what's different now. And I think that's what we have to do with our discussions with the OEMs now, I say, look, here's a better way of solving that problem. And nobody knows the tech better than we do. And so, I mean, the OEMs will spec it, but we have to help more or less educate them on, here's a different approach you can take that gives you the performance you need, but at lower total system cost.
Can I ask a question real quick? I'd like to backtrack just for a second to what John was talking about, in terms of share authorization. So, Sumit, you've told us, investors, a couple times in the last 6 to 8 months, that one of the stumbling blocks or blockades was balance sheet. In fact, just recently, the most recent earnings call. And so, so my question is, are these, and I don't know if we will let you answer, but are these deals that we are close to signing in industrial contingent on this investors approving the share authorization? And secondly, aren't they just as concerned, I know they kind of go together, but about, are you building a sustainable business? You know, in other words, it's great to have the shares to sell into the market, but, you know, what comes after the share authorization? And do they want to see success with at least one primary industrial customer, a large one, to be able for them to make a decision to move forward with this company and this solution?
Great question. Really, actually, if you think about it, right, when you think about the share authorization, part of it is the company has to, they don't care about the share authorization the way, sometimes we start talking about it. They want to make sure the company's on a sustainable path. So it's not just the share authorization, it's all the other things that we talk about and all the things that we're executing on. That's actually what the important point is. Is the business going to be around if I trust you, right? I would say that, last year, the thing that, the one automotive trucking company that OEM that we were dealing with, that was pretty challenging, right? Because they squeezed us down to a point that it was, I think we would not be here if we do a deal like that, right? So we were very, very cautious about it, right? But I think the equation would have been different if we had other customers in a different sector. They would not have squeezed us so much, which is kind of paradoxical, right? You need to be supportive to get over the hump, but you're squeezing the one that is the weakest. But if you did that, it would have it better, right? So, I think Anubhav and I spent 4 to 5 months, I don't even know, it was like about a year ago, right? April, May, it was going, starting in November. It was trying to convince them that we have the support from our investors, that we can actually stay, in a sustainable path. And ultimately, we could not convince them that we cannot fund this. The proof of that is like, well, you can fund this then, right? Which was kind of counter, right? I mean, we were just being honest about really what is possible. I think what we've done in the last 8 months with the High Trail deal, I think it's put us on a better path because we have an anchor investor that has committed things, that things are going well, right? I mean, they've been a great investor, right? I think everybody was concerned about short selling and this and this. None of those things have come true, right? They've been actually a really, really good investor. And I think it puts us on a very much more sustainable path. So the balance sheet is where it is, but we still have gunpowder left with a partner that's in place. So now that as we start executing on, our purchase agreements, you need to have authorized shares to say no, but now here's a sustainable path. So it's not just about High Trail or anything else. It's, as we've described, Anubhav has described, there's a broader market to stabilize the company long term. You want to be something that is an anchor partner for them for long term, right? And for that, different tools will be needed. And to enable that, we believe that Proposal 2 and Proposal 3 is going to put the company in a better path. I think it's appropriate for me to say, do it or not, or this will happen, right? I think I'm just shying away from that because, I mean, come on, guys. We have investments outside Microvision, right? I mean, no management team will ever say that. That's just not appropriate. But I don't want to make it out, but I'm just emphasizing it is an important point you bring up. We do believe it's a very important that Proposal 2 and Proposal 3 are accepted. And customers do look at that, yes. And also, investment partners we bring or other partnerships we bring.
Given current opportunities in industrial, state of maturity, as you mentioned, work qualifications, help us understand what the next 3, 6, 9 months might look like if things go relatively well. What's remaining?
I think we're in the last stages of some other discussions, so I think, I'm just going to leave it at that, right? I think for us as a company, what I think we have to do is we need to get, I think we're really hungry and really great in engineering. I think we have to get really hungry and really aggressive in sales. I think Glenn joining has been great. I think he's got all of engineering. I think I'm going to focus all my time on sales and BD, right? I think it just needs that much attention, right? And it's not a reflection on our team. It's just, if it's that important, you really have to hit the ground running and, burn the sole of your shoes if you have to find as many opportunities. Yeah. We have assets built out. I think we can leverage that. I think, now is the time to not just beyond the first deal. You have to say, what are the follow-ons that you can do beyond that?
Yeah, I'm just looking shorter term, given current opportunities. When is the soonest you might have to start ramping?
I think I cannot answer that, right? Because, it would hint to somebody else that we're talking about them, right? I think we're working on it, but it is, we understand the urgency. I can assure you that. Yeah. Yes, please.
How much of the industrial do we have to kind of get in the next 12 to 18 months to basically be in a position to where when automotive OEMs are ready to make a decision for awarding an RFQ, that have the warm fuzzies that they're going to trust likely that their secure supply chain, they're actually a business that is basically standing on their own 2 feet, that they're not sole ones.
I'm not going to give a number, but we have to have a foundation industrial that looks sustainable. But I think the interesting thing that Glenn said that I'm going to have him emphasize again is we're going back to them not just saying, well, I got this Maven, I got this Movia. He's saying that they have to rethink. If they really want to make a commercially viable product for their customers, they have to actually rethink beyond the German OEMs. And it starts with price, but also starts with features. Like you're making me do a 120-degree Maven. Do you really want that? It drives up the cost. But what if you had a cheaper version of the Movia S on the corners and Maven, right? So maybe you want to emphasize that again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And maybe also auto customers will be interested to know. I mean, they're always worried about security of supply and supply. What's the supply base health look like? So that industrial vertical is really important for us, and because it's always going to be helpful to selling into auto. They want to know they're not just fully dependent on auto. And then, as Sumit was just saying, the approach the OEMs have been taking, it has not been successful, not at scale. I mean, it's a very niche, very expensive option for the vehicle. And, that's where I think we have a unique opportunity right now to show them, hey, there's a different way of approaching this that can bring down system costs, that can actually not only give you level 3 capability, but actually enhance your level 2 in your ADAS systems. And so that's what, as Sumit and I have been talking, that's what we're really focused on, bringing that to the OEM space now, between now and really EA, and moving quickly on that. Because we think we can move them, we can help the OEMs basically achieve success with level 3 with the approach that we want to take.
I think, you've been trying. So, yeah, please.
Hi, Sumit. On the subject of LiDAR, you mentioned during the 2024 annual earnings call something about a miniature LiDAR on top of a helmet for a soldier. Would that be a separate module, or would it be a module that, say, includes a red, green, blue IR diode?
Yeah, I think that was more, the question always comes up, right, about AR, and I wanted to tell you that given my more than a decade in AR, the problem that I believe that's being solved for IVAS is incorrect. The thing that any of us in this room, I could put it on the headset and walk around for like 15 minutes to 45 minutes, most of you are going to get motion sickness, right? How do you solve that? So you really need a very high refresh rate in the display. MEMS can do that, right? Certainly we can go to 90 hertz or higher. We can certainly do that, absolutely, right? Without needing huge amounts of electronics. But then the problem is that how are you using it? So if it is just putting some information in your foveal view or in your peripheral view, and it's at 3 meters, what is considered infinity. Now try running while your eye's focusing on 3 meters. Think about when you run, typically you're looking, further out. That means you have to adjust the focal distance, right? That's, these are things that cause the technology not to get adopted. This is real human-machine interaction problems that have to be solved, okay? So IVAS is only 400 sensors. Let's not get all wacky. There's a real big problem to be solved. Whoever solves this, there's lots to be had because, again, it's a new category somebody could create. What I was talking about was beyond that, you cannot, if you wanted to put it on the head of a soldier, it has to be a certain price point. So maybe, you know, like I'm just a soldier, he's a captain, he's a major, everybody will get a different headset. In some cases, somebody higher up perhaps wants to visualize the entire field without having to have a display, right? So if you had like a MOVIA LiDAR on your head, you would effectively be able to map the terrain and, you know, display on whatever terrain you're in. Somebody's on a flat ground, somebody's on a rock, you can display the information around it. It's just, you know, this is more like a vibe thing. This is like a futuristic idea people have of how would people accept the information on an AR headset that they don't get on a TV or on a cell phone right now, all right? The other thing that's really needed is really, really much more improved head tracking, right? This is another piece. So if you really want to make a very successful headset, you need head tracking, high refresh rate, and some way to display the information, which is not a 2D display, because there's enough 2D displays out there. Why would you need a headset, right? So again, the problem is not that there's a display technology, can we do this or not? We can do a lot of things, and we do have an intimate understanding of how to solve the problem. We can do beyond the MEMS. And we have the building blocks, as you see back there, to actually go solve that. But we need a customer that's willing to say, hey, let's partner on that. There's a bigger problem we can solve for them than just the MEMS. That's my point. Okay. Yes, please.
I got a follow-up to that. So given what you just stated, that you have the technology and the tools to solve those problems, I'm confused why you haven't reached out to Palmer Luckey to at least let him know you know what the real problems are, and you stand ready to address them. Whether that goes anywhere is, who knows? But
yeah.
This is the kind of thinking that Microvision has historically had, where they have great tools, they have great employees, but you got to get that knowledge out to the people that can use it.
I think you know, we promote ourselves to everybody out there that would be a good partner to our technology. I think he's been trying for. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So on your earnings call, you said something about not going after billion-dollar contracts in the defense world. And at first, like, it took me a second to digest that. I just wanted to maybe let you add some color as to why Microvision as a company isn't going after those contracts. And I'm assuming that it has to do with the fact that the capital you guys are focused on industrial, automotive, and obviously now that with the Department of Defense, you're focused on that as well. But to the point that the gentleman just made, if we have the technology, as a shareholder, I would happily want to invest our time into trying to go after the contracts. Yeah. And please.
No, let me answer that because that's going to be a long answer. Then I'll give it back to you. You can ask the second half of it. Okay. So I'm going to take it back to like the average daily trading volume. Like, we are here because all of you have such a great interest, right? This is a small company in Redmond, but yet 76 people spending their own money showed up to ask us a bunch of questions. So we're here because of the enthusiasm you have, right? And you may have questions of why the 200 million, right? Part of it is you're here, I believe, is because you have trust in the board and the management, because we are, you know, trustworthy as in like the best stewards of the capital and the tools that we're given, right? I want to set that as a context, okay? So, and part of the trust comes, in my opinion, is from at least, you know, in the years that have, you know, you've been interacting with me and now, you know, these two guys, right? We say reasonable things that anybody can say, oh, that's the most reasonable outcome, right? So we don't say crazy things to whip people up to get support, all right? I've never said, or I never meant to say that we don't want to go for a $1 billion contract. That's crazy. Who the hell would say that? But I'm realistic about you can't start running. You have to crawl, walk, and then run. So realistically speaking, we are entering a new space that Glenn is talking about. Hey, there's like great opportunity here. The parts are more valuable than the whole. Whatever people think, you know, we have to do that. The first thing is create this big sensor fusion, you know, development platform to demonstrate to people that we are real. Not just to you to get, you know, your support, but also the potential customers. That's realistic. And from there, of course, you want to build out. You bring on an advisory board, and they're going to advise you towards the future. They want to see that, you know what, if we bring you to a certain level, that you have the tools to execute towards it, right? So I don't think you should ever walk away thinking that there is no desire to go after a $1 billion contract. It's just, it would be out of sequence. It would be like some of the other companies. They say things to just get support and, you know, get the share price all whipped up, and then volatility does not help us. But I would say part of the interest in the company remains because we are much more realistic how we plan to execute. So the go-to-market strategy for the military side of it, right? We haven't talked about that yet. We are working on it. We are gathering a lot of information. We are going to have a very specific strategy. I'm pretty sure not a single vertical we've ever talked about, there's no intent to go after a billion-dollar contract. It's just you don't want to be a little guppy and think that you're going to eat the whale. You want to eat the whale, but you know what? You just have to be very, like, you guys joined the journey with me about the 800-pound gorilla comment, right? If we did not have that authorization back then, MicroVision not here, they would have had a springing license to everything. So we survived that, right? And we've been reasonable about it consistently. So when we get into it, of course, our intention is to go after billion-dollar contracts. But I'm not going to say some crazy things that other people say to get the support, and then on top of that, there's no way to execute it, and then you suffer at the back end.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That really answers that. And one last question, having to do with sensor fusion. At one point, a couple of years ago, I think you were talking about potentially looking at making a LiDAR unit that may actually incorporate a radar and a camera. Is there any movement on that?
Yeah, I'll answer that, and then I'm going to give it to Glenn, because when I said that, that was, again, it was said as in like, hey, the future could be that. We can do that. So the context was not that we were going to do it. It's like, we can do that, but we have to spend our money making the LiDAR better. So it's, the question at that point was like, why don't you do that? Why don't you go after bigger business? And my answer was like, metered. I'm going to focus on the LiDAR because let's get business with LiDAR done. But you want to take it to the next place now.
Yeah. Yeah, that is exactly what we're looking at now. If you think about MOVIA L, MOVIA S coming on, MOVIA S in particular is a great product to have the LiDAR component for sensor fusion because it's 180 by 140, so really good field of view. You're able to do significant point cloud cleanup and processing in the sensor. So that's a great product now to join with radar, to join with camera. And so those are the things that we're looking at. Okay, what are the right technologies for those other sensing modalities? And for us to be able to play in some of the markets that we're talking about, we want to be able to show, here's how this will work. And so as Sumit said, we haven't really gotten into a lot of detail on that now, but that's the next step there.
Yeah, I think you've been waiting, so.
Yeah, I just have more of a brief statement. I just wanted to say that I am going to be voting for the share authorization. And I think this might resonate with us. I know how many shares I buy. What about C-level and the board?
Yeah. I think we bought over a period of time. I think, if the opportunity is right, we will buy. Yeah.
I think we'd like to see it.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
I want to quick pivot back to defense because I'm a little bit confused. At the last earnings call, you talked about, with respect to our opportunities in defense, that we would, the way I understood it, we would first have to partner with a prime, that we would be a subcontractor. So how do you approach the Department of Defense as a subcontractor before you partner with the prime?
I'll give you my impression. So this is one of the lessons learned for me, that you always want to be known for what problem you can solve, right? So you want to make sure the company is understood out there. And again, a lot of the advice that, the reason to bring is, I have a premise. Instead of, spending money on it and taking a risk, bring out a tribunal of, professionals from the DoD and have them advise you. So the premise that I'm putting out there is like, it just always goes down. It does not matter what vertical you're in. Humans are still humans. How we make decisions are always based upon, do I know them? Do I trust them? Is the tech real? Is it PowerPoint? The questions that we answer in automotive and industrial, it's going to come in the military also. Just different stripes on the shoulders, okay? So it's more. But again, as we say, we're going to develop a go-to-market strategy. We have brought on a council that's going to guide us towards, is that the right way to think about it? But I gave my unfiltered, it was a question I gave unfiltered, like that's what I believe at that moment, that some version of that is kind of like common sense, right? The rest is just ceremony. You can hire so many lobbyists, you can hire people, you can be a big prime, you can do all those things, right? It's all ceremony, but the decision always gets made, there's a problem, can you solve it? How many people know ahead of time that there's an advanced technology that sometimes if they don't even know there's an advanced technology that can solve a problem that they have not even articulated? So the best thing is promote yourself of what you can do. Spend the investors the money that you've given us to create a prototype that nobody's asked for, that we believe that, let's say it was on a drone and we want to have some localization and mapping data or something like unexploded ordnances, right? Nobody's asked us for that. We believe that it's a true demonstration of what we can do. And that's a good introduction of the company to the world. Now, we may do a subset of that and partner with somebody. That's more a go-to-market strategy, which we will work on for the next 6 months. Okay?
Autonomy-based, that's our defense effort is all.
Including, yeah.
So, because you said AR is quite a ways out, so I'm assuming that extends to defense, all those things.
Yeah, augmented reality is you augment the reality to put information in there. That's just a portal. It's just replacing the piece of glass you see in the back. That's all it is. This is more valuable because this is actually looking at the situation and extracting more value of the information with sensors. So that's a couple of hands.
I don't know if I need the mic or not.
Just talk really loud, Ty.
I'm usually pretty loud. My wife tells me all the time.
Is that mic on?
Is it on?
You got a big mouth, just go ahead.
All right, so I want to go back to sensor fusion. So my perception, pardon the pun, is it's hard. I mean, you talked about low level, that's hard. Object level perception, still pretty hard. I mean, there's companies out there that dedicate their lives to Mobileye, sensor fusion company in many respects. You've got NVIDIA and Qualcomm, those guys are working on sensor fusion. So it's a good, obviously it's important. Right?
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't invest in it if it wasn't important. But other smaller companies who dedicated solely just to sensor fusion, relatively small companies, but working on it for years.
Yeah.
So what gives Microvision the thought that you can do it better than these giant companies and even other companies that have dedicated many years to it?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah, please.
There's a couple of aspects to it, and having been involved with sensor fusion at various levels for really the last 20 years. So worked many years with Mobileye very closely, worked with all of our own radar products. Two comments, or two reasons. One is that ultimately the fact that we make the LiDAR and have the IP from the former IBEO, the foundation is there. So we're not starting from scratch. We're not saying, it'd be a good idea to do this. It's actually building on IP that we already have. And like the IBEO team has looked at, or has already done fusion of radar and LiDAR, two very similar technologies from a sensor fusion standpoint. Yeah, low level. And so at the end of the day, when I look at it, so that's one. We have a good foundational base in the technologies and the sensors themselves. The second is the tool chains now to do this are really good in terms of how you can integrate the various data streams, how you process those. So you have really good tool chains for doing that. Other products that are out there. And so you don't have to, quite honestly, the heavy lifting that companies like Delphi, Aptiv, Conti, Mobileye did for decades, we don't have to do it that way. We can do it using modern tool chains that allow you to integrate, do the time stamping, do the complete integration of all of the mapping much, much more efficiently. And so for us, it's now about, hey, we have experience doing this, we have foundational tech. We think, we can bring this into industrial where it's not being done today. And so take that experience from auto, bring it into industrial. I'm going to use this analog to digital, the phrase that you brought in. Bring that, really kind of modernize that industry by doing that. And so it's, for us, it's development, but it's very, very consistent with what we already are doing.
Well, let me just add one thing, Ty. If I remember when I took over as CEO, right, the question that you asked, and actually you asked it, was, you've been doing displays all this time. What business do you have to bring in the LiDAR, right? And now you don't even question that. So the point is like that what we're talking about here, there is no magical keys to the castle that one company has that other smart engineers cannot do, right? Our engineers are good, and they have had experience with it, right? So yeah, part of ambition is also being, confident in your ability to say, I know how to solve the problem because I understand the physics, I have the tools, and, with experience, you know what mistakes not to make.
It's a time factor.
it's a time factor, but if you're not in this, if this is not where you make an investment, a couple of years down the line, you'll say, oh, crap, we should have done that because we just started, pumping out devices and we have plateaued and there's no growth, right? With very little investment in the future, the conversation about the company could be completely different. So, you may hold us, Glenn will get on the call, right, and say, oh, Glenn, why is there no progress? But if you look long enough and look back and say, at this moment, hey, this was a really big bet, and with very little investment, they got there, right? So we were much more efficient with capital. So that's the real benefit of us to be in charge because we understand what we have to do, how to spend the capital, and we're not making bets in areas that we're not going to win big.
No, I understand what you're saying. I understand the bet, and thank you for the logic behind it.
Yep.
I think, I don't want to speak for all investors, but, over the last 4 years, there's been things that we're going to do. And I know you make progress. I'm not taking that
We need to sign, if the agreements were signed right now, I think the tone would be different. We acknowledge that. I acknowledge that, right? I think that's part of timing. Like, whenever, the end of June is the next earnings call, what we can get done by then, right? That does not mean the company's not working on it, right? If that same thing happens on July 2nd, I don't think you're unhappy. It's just I can't talk about it, right? So the point is like, we're going to do everything possible. We feel confident where it is. But this thing that we're talking about, this is more valuable. This is, and again, this is not a pivot. It is a transformation, the next transformation of the company from just a LiDAR player. Because, as you said, on a single hand, you can start counting the American LiDAR companies.
So let me ask you a question, because you wanted to do this a year ago, a year and a half.
Yeah, it was aspirational. Right. But now we have the experience to say, if you really want to do it, this is how you have to do it. So I'm humble about it. Like, I could have never taken the company there by myself. Right? You can have a vision, but to execute on it, you want experience. You can never, experience is more valuable than anything, right? So we're fortunate that Glenn's taken over, so I think, he's going to take us on the journey.
So a quick question about Mosaic. It seemed like all along with sensor fusion a year ago, it was sort of, austerity, got to backed off Mosaic. It seemed like, to me, it just seemed like Mosaic was kind of dead. But now you're talking about it. I heard some comments on the call. So where does Mosaic stand now in the MicroVision sort of product future?
Good question. I'll give you my perspective, and then maybe you can talk about it from a commercial or a business perspective. Mosaic, for me, it's a really important development tool that allows us and can potentially allow our customers to apply our products much, much better. It actually, I think it has tremendous potential. In particular, as we get into more machine learning, more AI-based algorithms for our products. Because it's a great tool to basically for not just validation and ground truthing, but actually developing training data, validating training data, curating. I mean, it's one of these kind of gems that we have that I'm starting to get to really understand much better since joining. Now that's kind of looking at it from how can Mosaic help us develop our products, MicroVision's products. I think there's a little history there in terms of externally. I'll allow Sumit to speak to.
I think of Mosaic as an uncut gem. It is really valuable. We've tried to sell it as a standalone product or licensing, and doesn't really go much further because other people have different things. But to really have it shine, our team in Hamburg, if you give them your training data, they can do magic with it, right? So it's an uncut gem. But the best way to utilize that is to utilize that for our development, right? So now that we do real sensor fusion, right, our own platform, there is no barrier. We're going to use the tool. We're going to show that. And the best case to show what that gem could have been possible for other people is to use it ourselves and see how quickly and how cheaply we can develop a validated product and bring it to market, right? The thing is, it's another asset that has been sitting there for a while. We've been trying to monetize it, but the point was people just do not understand it because the best way to run it is to let our team run it as a service. And it's our data. We can't give our data to anybody else. We got all these restrictions, right? So that's what happened. So.
Just in that same vein, we had a digital twin partnership. Has that? One would assume. So customers, in addition to seeing what problem you're solving, they need to understand there's a return on their investment for that. So I would assume things like Mosaic or our digital twin partnership would give them a chance to game out, the whole scenario implementation so that you can actually put ROI numbers on it. Yeah. Do you have anything to add on that?
Recently, we were part of a RFP process for Mosaic. This was a few months ago, right? And this customer, potential customer, was from Ibeo days. And way back when they chose somebody else, they did not pick Ibeo's technology. Insolvency happened, Microvision is there, we're supporting it, it's great, right? Whatever solution they picked didn't work. They were looking again, right? We went back in there, and I did the right thing, which is offer that as a service. The best case is to let us be a partner and let me enable you, right? Well, it's our data. We can't let it go out of the company. Just why don't you just train our engineers and do it? It's like, no, that's not how the tool works. There's lots of ins and outs to it. It's not like a piece of software. Like, it's not like a Microsoft Office that is just developed as a package and it's been dumbed down to the level. It's just the features that you want, right? It does a lot more things, right? Yet again, they did not make the right choice. They're like, oh, no, we're going to stay with the model we have. When clearly the model they have is not working, right? So I keep calling it an uncut gem because that's what it is. The best way we can do it is to showcase it. What Glenn's going to showcase, how quickly can we go from his concept to something that you can actually see running. Like, how did you do that? Well, that uncut gem enabled you to validate your product and have fast iterations to improve it. Right, Glenn?
Yep.
I mean, that is, how do you put a price on that? Now, for a customer to put a price on that, they would have to trust and jump with us, right? We can, we're earnest, we're honest, right? We are saying, we're going to solve your problem. I need to make some money, but I need to solve a problem here, and we can do that. We'll do that ourselves, and then it'll be the talk of the town all of a sudden, right? So it's like the ebbs and flows. Again, we cut down. We had to have austerity. We had to get down to the level of sustainable business, right? It was painful cuts, but the core part of that business is there, and we intend to grow, right? But grow the right way.
The other key unlock for any of those kind of development tools or those validation tools is if you're selling the sensor, basically, and the customer that now is using that, you can provide then that supporting tool chain. So that's the other key, unlock for those types of tool sales. It tends to be a little bit harder when you're just selling a tool, and then you run into some of the issues that Sumit just talked about. When they're using your sensor, they're generating data that is native to the tool. It's more like running downhill.
We're going to come back to you, but I think you've been waiting. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question about, you mentioned the trucking company contract that we ceded to a competitor. As I understand it, that competitor is using FMCW technology.
No, it was Septon.
Oh, it's Septon, okay. Well, I'm curious about the frequency modulated continuous wave technology specifically. And I've been an investor in the company largely because I believe we have a technical advantage. Is there anything high level that I could consume that could give me a perspective on how we compete against that technology in particular?
I think we'll have a cost advantage. I think edge emitting lasers, and VCSELs, 905 nanometer laser, you don't have to invest billions to get that silicon supply chain down to competitive levels. So if everything that Glenn always reminds us is that you got to think about cost as number one. Features, yes, but cost is always going to be number one for that industry, right?
Yeah,
the game is cooked.
Yeah.
So you can talk about FMCW, right? We can debate all we want, but at the end of the day, what's going to drive that decision for OEMs? Cost. Which is going to cost us one. Something that we don't have to invest anything in, right? Lasers exist, 905 exists. We just have to get them working, right?
Yeah, that is super critical, because one of the mistakes that you can make when you're looking at a new technology for auto or for that market is to focus, just on how do I deliver the technical performance, and not worry about, or not spend the time thinking about, okay, fine, but when it scales, how do I drive costs down? And that's where time of flight basically has a much lower cost structure, as scaling occurs than you have with FMCW. And ultimately, from a performance standpoint, time of flight can deliver what you need for the job. And so,
Okay, but they've announced, who knows,
Yeah.
we don't know the details, but they announced a top 10 OEM passenger vehicle deal, right? Now, development deal, I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, so, kind of odd.
No.
Not odd?
We can have a development deal. But you'd have to dedicate all your resources to work on that with no revenue coming in, with no guarantee that you're going to actually get the win, right? So again, at some point, are we going to start doing that? Absolutely. I've said that on the earnings call, right? But at this moment, if we're so close to something in the industrial, which is going to be meaningful to get the company to the next level and unlock other conversation opportunities for us, right? Again, you can make lots of moves on a chessboard, right? Which is the one that you need to make right now for the long term, right? So I think I think I'll just quantify your question, and with due respect, it's more about anxiety, like why aren't you announcing, right? We're not just talking ourselves out of deals. I assure you that, right? We're getting to the point like, no, now we're in a good place. Now it's time to make a bet, move forward, and live with the consequences.
I think if I could, just on a follow-up here, there seem to be different dimensions of importance to different players in industrial and in automotive segments. I am unclear as an investor in this company what the top considerations are. It's clear that cost is one of them. We've mentioned power draw being a key focus.
Yep.
Sometimes as I'm perusing online, I'll see, sunlight projection is important.
No.
Community-
Number 3 is the perception software. What can you do with perception? That's number 3.
Okay, so cost, power, perception.
Right. So yeah, if let's say I have a 15 million point per second Maven, right, that has got lots and lots of points in there, but you have to deal with voxels and you cannot deal with the existing pipeline of perception that they have. How does it matter? What I need to do is solve a problem. It's not about who's got the highest number of points per second, right? So I have to think about the perception software as a key component.
For automotive?
For automotive, for industrial, both of them, yes. That's actually
You said automotive, the whole perception software thing, it's like a non-starter.
Right, but they will own that, but I still have to respect that they're going to, go ahead.
You have to feed it.
You have to feed it, so the problem that you would face, they're facing. So you have to decide, like,
I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean by that?
the point cloud has to get fed into some sort of computer where the perception resides, right?
Their perception software.
Right, but we understand how perception works. Therefore, we have to know, if I don't prepare them this way, their perception is not going to work. So therefore, to his question is different than where you're taking it now. Answering his question is, it is cost always number 1, power there, right? But how well can you use your hardware to execute on perception at the lowest cost, the lowest power?
How well think of it this way, how well would our sensor fit into the specific customer architecture? And perception being that interface.
So the point cloud itself
Yeah.
is designed to be able to be processed
Correct.
by perception.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have plumbing in this building. If I poured honey down it, what would happen? Right? So you have to think about, it's a half joke, but the thing is, like, engineers use the word plumbing a lot. When they set up these development, they set up, like, what's the data? Like, how are we going to actually process all of this stuff, right? So you have to think about that, and since we know so much about perception, we can prepare our hardware for automotive, but industrial, we control the entire ecosystem. Our perception goes in there. So I think that's more your question. Yeah. So I think of me personally, right? I mean, Glenn can have a different opinion, right? And he's going to take the company to a different place. I'm just saying, I really think that perception is actually a pretty important point long term. It's not resolution, it's not range. We are going to have those things, right? But those are axioms. Those are given points of every LiDAR. You have to have resolution and range, but not the maximum resolution, the maximum range. It's what the customer wants to do. If they're doing a perception that's only 100 meters out, why do they need 400 meter LiDAR? Right?
Sure.
Okay.
So for the top use cases, it would just be handy to kind of see where we have a competitive edge versus competing technical solutions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I've got a question that
That guy's got a mic and he's been waiting for a few. Just mic if you could. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first is related to the ASIC. At one point, we were told that we wouldn't pursue the ASIC without a customer requesting it, but then I think you said we had to complete it to show the potential customer what it can do. Now, some investors had seen the word tape out mentioned on LinkedIn, which would indicate the ASIC has been completed. Can you shed any light on that and what the feedback has been from the OEMs that they have indeed tested with a completed ASIC?
The ASIC the first set of comments you're talking about were related to Maven, that we were going to go to a Maven ASIC. But then I said, eventually, if there's no agreement, there's no reason to go invest in that ASIC. The second part of the comment that you made is actually related to the tape out of the ASIC required for MOVIA. So the Ibeo team, of course, had the MOVIA sensor. They call it the next sensor. But it was not, in my opinion, not successful because they did not own all parts of the ASIC themselves. So we actually had to pivot. This is where we did have to pivot, and I don't like that word, by the way. We had to put the resources on MOVIA because the near-term opportunities MOVIA industrial were much more important. And so securing that path became, so the tape out that we talk about is for the MOVIA ASIC. The Maven we have not finished yet because, if there's no OEM, why spend all that money?
Okay, thank you.
So it is still consistent. There's no inconsistency there.
Well, I appreciate the clarity on that because that was a bit of confusion, I think. With
No, he's got one more follow-on. But
okay, so the other question, so there's There's been a theory going around on the boards that Microvision is restricted from selling any of the MEMS technology. We reported 0 sales in the fourth quarter of 22. And by all accounts, if not for the acquisition of IBEA, we would have continued reporting 0 in sales since that time, with the only exception being the fourth quarter of 23 when the remainder of the Microsoft deal was written down. So my question is there a restriction on the MEMS technology that doesn't allow us to monetize it related to the military and the IVAS or SBMC? And if so, what plans do we have in place that would allow a dual use of the technology so we can sell it for non-military purposes? And also, can you clarify whether any automotive OEM has possession of a MAVEN sample that is not under Microvision supervision?
I'm not going to answer all of that question, right? But I'm going to answer the part that there is no restriction on the Gen 4 technology, the MEMS. I think this is something that you guys are.
Well, my understanding is that Gen 5 is in the MAVEN, so I'm just specifically.
Gen 5 is in the MAVEN, right? But MAVEN is, they don't have to buy it, right? I mean, we have to collect the data. So this is a misunderstanding of how OEMs, they don't. What they want us to do is to put it on the car, collect the data, give them the point cloud, start working on it, right? The RFQs are 1,500 items in the RFQ you have to respond to, right? You have to go collect the data, and you have to go update that, right?
Okay.
So I think the way you're asking the question, right, that's not the correct way. It's the RFQ process involves quite a lot of data, that you have to give them, and typically you're responsible for collecting your own data.
Okay.
And later on the stage, so if you think about what happened with Daimler, right? Once they get to the decision point, only then they give you a PO for $432,000 or something like that and buy your sensors. Because till then, they want everybody in play. They're not going to take the responsibility of testing your sensor. They do some of that, but really, it's your responsibility to do all the work and provide the data.
Well, I guess the confusion coming from my perspective is is my understanding that our competitors are selling samples that they're actually generating revenue, and it seems that we've basically generated 0 revenue from the MAVEN. So, and we, I think at one point there was a laser restriction where they get a class 1 certification to sell them, that we had with those images of them going out. But there's been, again, 0 revenue reported to the MAVEN as far as I understand.
I have no idea what anybody else is doing, and I cannot answer for what they're saying. I can just do it for us, right? We focus on the RFQs, we collect the data, we perfect our product as we go along, right? We find bugs in there all the time. I mean, yesterday we had a meeting. There's things that I'm not happy about, right? But our team keeps working on it, right? We keep improving it. Our focus is that the go-to-market strategy is not changed, that you have to really focus on the OEMs and these RFQs, right? And at some point, our success in industrial happens, we're plateauing, we have resources available. We may try to do these development contracts with no promise of a OEM deal, right?
Okay.
I think you've mentioned it, right? Sometimes, why would you take on that risk if you don't know you're going to win it, right? You're going to blow through 20, 30 millions of cash, and you have no idea if you're going to win the RFQ, right? So.
Yeah.
So you can say that the OEMs do have samples of the MAVEN, just trying to clarify that.
No, as I said, in the RFQ process, we collect the data, and we are the ones that have to update it.
Okay.
This is a made-up thing that you guys are, beating each other up on, right? That's not how it works. They spend money when they know they're going to make a decision. Till then, if you open RFQ, your responsibility is to collect all the data and respond to all the items in the RFQ. And they are not 5, it's 1,500 or more line items you have to go through. So it's quite a lot of work, and they're not going to do that for anybody.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that.
And then circle back to revenues, and I apologize out of bounds because I don't want to put you back up against the wall on this, but as it relates to revenues, last year, as late as the Q3 earnings call in November, you reiterated that you anticipated the company meeting the revenue guidance for last year of 8 to 10 million, which would require the fourth quarter, if I'm not mistaken, to be a $5 to $7 million quarter.
Yes.
I could be
Yep.
close.
Yep.
And of course, we came in short, I think, at 1.7 million. And I believe you mentioned that we expected to see some or all of that revenue in 2025. Yet, first quarter, we had $600 million worth of revenue.
600,000.
I'd love 600 million.
600,000. I wish it. So the question is, what happened? That you can share with us so we can understand the process of working with these industrial OEMs, where we were in the process then, and what delayed that revenue into looks like middle of this year?
Yep. So revenue guidance, if you think about it, it's always based on the visibility that we as a management team have at that point in time. So standing in October last year, or I should say, we had an earnings call in November first week. At that point, we were expecting the industrial customers that we were working on, our engineers were actively working on customer sites and customer projects, and there were discussions about NRE, which is non-recurring engineering revenue that we were going to charge for the customization that we were doing to our software, which was going to go inside their particular hardware. Now, this software is what they were going to integrate with their, like what Glenn described, it's the level of perception software that actually enables the point cloud feed go into their domain controller and the compute that they were using. Now, that process has taken longer than anticipated because the deal did not close. They were not able to integrate that LiDAR solution that we were providing into their feed. It got pushed into 2025, and at this point, we're still standing here, and as you know, the deal is not done yet, which makes the point that I was trying to tell you a few comments earlier. It's hard for us sitting here from a finance perspective, in the absence of a hard PO, how do you actually communicate to the street that what is the actual revenue? And hence, that's why I shied away from calling 30 to 50 million as the technical term what guidance means, because what that means is you are very sure of what the revenue is going to be because you have data points, you have proof points from the customer which enable you that. And I think that's why what I'm saying is at this point in time, what we're communicating is where we are in terms of our journey, our engagement with the customer, and what we believe we're going to be able to communicate a guidance when we have a signed PO or a signed contract that gives us, that puts a time to the ramp schedule, because it keeps going back to the ramp schedule. So hopefully that clarifies, because at that time, what we were anticipating is this customer is going to be done, it's going to make a decision, they're going to pay us the NRE, and we're going to recognize that as revenue. Because revenue, that NRE recognition, revenue recognition works when the customer approves that this work has been performed and we're accepting the solution or the services offered by Microvision.
So in a sense, there's a backlog of NRE that you cannot put until there's a purchase order.
Until there's actually a customer approval.
Okay.
Acceptance of that.
Acceptance of that work that we provided. Because
I can't send an invoice till I can say the KPI was met. Here you go. Here's the bill.
Is it fair to say that those deals that you were looking at and providing guidance for back in Q4, you said projects.
Still in flight, yes.
Those are all still
And still in flight, yes.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and when I talk about pushing the chips and putting great context, right? So you guys have trust in what we're doing. Part of it is like at some point say, you know what, is that a few $1 million with NRE worth it? Am I just better off just getting a big contract done, right? This is the risk that we have to take, right? That's the decision. That's business judgment that we have to deploy of where we are, get the confidence, right? And it's not just like one person making the decision. We look at the same information, a group of us, and we decide if that's the right thing. And I think we're getting close to the point saying it's a customer that's saying reasonable things. It makes sense. This is the one that you actually go invest in, right? You've already invested in it, right? You got to a certain point. It doesn't behoove us. It makes us, if it's going to be more frictionless for us to actually enable them and not have to deal with this whole NRE thing, but we're going to monetize over a period of time, and the asset we've created can go to other customers. So it is in our best interest not to give them anything exclusive on that NRE, right? Those are the decisions that we work on and we debate now, okay? So keep that in context. I didn't want anybody to hear, oh, they said it's in flight. No, it's in flight, but we may take it off because that's how we want to get the deal done.
So if part of what I just heard was part of the deal is if they do pay you the NRE, then they get some rights to that.
Everybody, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's why people pay NRE, right? And if we think that there's more opportunity than that one customer, and it's already feeling more realistic, it's in our best interest not to do that, right? Yeah.
I think you have a question.
Please, yeah.
So I have been convinced you guys are doing everything you can with the auto OEM to try to move this forward. And clearly there are a lot of barriers to entry that maybe you can completely pass. But what I don't have clarity on really is you think they are interested and therefore willing to be early adopters of LiDAR technology, or are they just going to wait until it's forced by the government?
You want to answer that? And then I'll.
Yeah. Yeah, the OEMs will adopt LiDAR before the regulatory or the government mandates it. There's really, at this point, I don't even see really any pressure coming from the government. If you think about what NHTSA is doing, it's focusing right now on vulnerable road users and kind of ADAS systems, and then putting some restrictions or guardrails in for level 3 and level 4 systems, but they're not speccing the technology that you need to use for that. So for the OEMs, what will motivate them is when they have a feature they can offer on a vehicle using LiDAR, that uses LiDAR, that they think customers will pay a premium for. So it's an option that brings in a really nice premium. ADAS today is exactly that for the OEMs. ADAS packages are high margin option packages that the OEMs can put on top of what's required by the regulatory agencies. So it'll be an OEM-driven adoption rate. And then the question is, then it just comes down to when do they have the right value prop? And what we believe is today, the value prop's not very strong. That's why you don't see LiDAR being used across a lot of OEM platforms. We have to bring the cost down, give them a better way of achieving the functionality that they want, and then that'll accelerate adoption within the OEMs.
In companies like Germany, where they just approved level 3 countrywide, and with the Chinese OEMs being able to sell into the EU, isn't there more pressure on the European OEMs?
There's a couple, if you're a European OEM, there's a couple points of pressure that are being applied. One is, as you said, the Chinese, BYD offering God's Eye and their offerings, which as a German OEM, you don't want to ever be perceived as lagging in technology. You want to be a technology leader. The other is Tesla and the NEVs. I mean, the Teslas, the Rivians, they're offering now more advanced ADAS and more, looking at level 3 systems as well. So there will be, and then there's competition, just between the German brands and the US brands. So there is that natural competition, that pressure. So the good news is we don't see the OEMs moving away from level 3. They're still wanting to get there. The challenge is how do they get a rich feature set that, end consumers will pay for, at the right price point. And that's been the challenge, is how do they make it a good economic model for the vehicle.
So level 2++ allows OEMs to integrate LiDAR into the solution, but not have to, and basically because a lot in the U.S., very small areas of the country allow level 3.
Yeah.
In terms of consumer vehicles.
Yeah.
So explain the level 2++ and the difference between that and level 3.
Well, the simple explanation is driver in the loop, driver out of the loop. So level 3, the driver can be out of the loop, which means they never re-engage. Level 2++ systems like Super Cruise have a driver monitoring system, so you can be hands off, but the driver monitoring system looks at your eyes and then makes sure you're looking at the road. So you can re-engage. So you will have the ability to re-engage. So you're the backup system, right? And that's a level 2++. Full self-driving with Tesla, level 2++. Those, Blue Cruise, same thing. And so it's important that those systems are watching you as the driver to make sure that you are in the loop. Now, level 3, you don't have to look. You can be out of the loop, which means the car has to be able to navigate to if something goes wrong, it has to have fail operational capability, so a failure doesn't disable the system, and it has to be able to navigate to what's called a safe stop. So in other words, it can drive you, let's say you're sound asleep, it can drive you to a position where the car can safely stop with you out of harm's way, which means mapping, navigation, all of the dynamic path planning. It still needs to look at you to see, well, what are you doing? You're in the driver's seat. but it means the car has to control everything. And it's that fail operational piece that says, I need redundancy in in the perception system. So I need LiDAR to provide that redundancy and to provide that capability of seeing objects down the road, in addition to radar and vision. So.
Do you anticipate, like, European and even U.S. OEMs initially not using LiDAR and just depending on radar and cameras and fusion of those two with software before we see LiDAR introduced?
No, what we're seeing is they still want to use LiDAR because it is the right sensor for the task, which is free space detection and deterministic, measurement of, distance to objects and relative velocity. So it's a sensor that does that really, really well. Radar and vision, you can do that, but it doesn't do it as well as LiDAR. And so the OEMs, with the exception of really Tesla, at this point, the OEMs are still very much looking at using all three modes of perception: LiDAR, vision, and radar. Now, level 2++, they're doing with radar and cameras.
Our problem remains that, if there's a customer demand, we're always ready, like we say that, right? Perhaps the first feature, so the interesting part that I hear when Glenn says this is like, all these other features, small object detection, that's a very unique thing in the Autobahn. He lived in Germany as well, where you will have people driving 240 kilometers an hour, right? Yeah. And for them, it's a very specialized thing. Hardly any roads in the US where I could do that without killing myself, right? Let's be honest. Even in Montana, right? It's pretty freaking dangerous, okay? So there'll be a different set of problems, but the vulnerable road user is a great one. So perhaps the first victory in automotive for us is not Maven. Again, don't take a square peg and shove it into a round hole. Maybe the implementation you see there of Movia S, which is like, wait a minute, that's a demand they have right now. That's a problem they want to solve. That's what I think that's what he's saying. And there's a solution that's cost competitive, power competitive, all the competitive things that, perception ready that we talked about, right? So perhaps the first on-ramp for our LiDAR company is not like, let's not pigeonhole ourselves, like, talk about Maven. Maven is a harder problem. It's in Germany. But maybe the first implementation globally comes to, they want LiDAR, but something that we can do in LiDAR that cameras and radar cannot do, right? Yep. So the point is like, you want to on-ramp. You want somehow to become engaged with them where it's a project that's not just a custom development project and it goes nowhere, right? Pick the right project.
Yep.
Yep. Yep, please.
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking about, we're talking about industrial, military, and automotive. What's about aviation with all the rash of crashes, helicopters, broadsiding, commercial airliners, loss of communication? Why aren't we pursuing putting this in aviation? It seems like a no-brainer.
I think we'll put it in drones, but I think that's not the aviation you're talking about. But anytime, I think that was a question that was also asked by another investor early on, right? And my answer is still consistent, that anytime you think about a segment, if you're serious about it, and we're serious people, you have to put resources. You have to put millions behind it and have patience for 18 months minimum to go find a partner to say, I'm going to go get something done, right? So chasing after every shiny thing, we can blow through all the cash you guys allow us to raise and have nothing to show for it. So we want to go focus on industrial, do something. Focus on automotive, do something. Focus on military, do something, right? Focus on those segments and get something started, and then you build inertia in each individual segment to begin with. But either it's in pharmaceutical or aviation, a flash in the pan does not do us good. We'll blow through cash and may have nothing to show for it, right? So part of what we represent to our customers, to our banking partners, to everybody is like, that's how our decision-making process goes. There could be lots and lots of places that our application could apply. If I had the people and the money and the ego, let's go for it, right? But right now we're still trying to build a sustainable business that you guys feel comfortable that, hey, this investment was worth it. I know a lot of people have been in this investment for a long period of time. You want to see some returns. But we want to build a company that's sustainable for the next 10 years or longer, right? And part of it is we have to be much more judicious with our talent. The talent is, we have so many engineers, but also the cash we have.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of devices the aircraft have in them, but I'm thinking just a simple warning system, not something that controls the plane, but like microvision goggles that supposedly being used in the helicopter.
That exists, that technology exists now.
They've had that for years.
It's called TCAS.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I have a two-part. First part.
For him, one, because he's probably like, like bored right now. So make up a question for him.
There's share price incentives. They expire at the end of the year. I'd like to know how you feel about the possibility of one or two or three of those targets being met. And if not, what happens? And then the second question.
Well, let's answer the first one. Then we'll go to okay, go ahead.
So look, I think the share price targets, I can't say that we're going to hit them for sure, but what I think of this is what I described earlier, the asymmetric reaction. Because of the high ADTV, because of the high traffic or eyeballs looking at Microvision, which may be people on the fence of investing in the company at the behest of a deal, etc., the stock price may have an asymmetric reaction. Because right now, if you ask me, the targets look unrealistic standing where we are today. But I keep going back to the point that where we are with the stock trading dynamics, it may be possible for the, at least that's what I can't predict it, but where the stock price is poised for, where the volumes are, how many people are looking at the stock, it just makes it more achievable, if that's something I can comment. But obviously I can't say for certain that they're going to happen.
And if it does not met, they go back into the pool, right? Yep. So, again, we thought about it, right? It was risky for us to accept that incentive way back when, but it was congruent to what was happening in the market, right? How do you incentivize a group of people, right? I mean, again, even there, the board and the comp committee were judicious about it. We thought about it a lot, saying, okay, in this time frame, it's the case. Otherwise, would it be easier for me to incentivize Glenn with like a, jumbo grant, right? Yeah, of course it is, but we're trying to still run a normal company, right? And we're lucky that we have professionals that acknowledge where the company is, right? And keep it congruent, right? We're not, we're not founders, but we act like founders most of the time, right? We take less so we make sure that the company long-term has a sustainable path. Do I want those things to trigger? Yeah, you guys are going to benefit, but it takes, 30 days or something like that, right? For it to be sustaining at that point, right? Of course, would we want, we work really hard. I know, all of us work really hard. We'd want more shares, right? We want more compensation. But again, once that happens, it's not like we're going off and selling any of our shares, right? We are still committed to the company. So I think, we certainly are not discounting. I don't think Anubhav and I are discounting it won't happen. He's saying that the fundamentals of the market, it may happen. I think we'll be very excited for that, right?
So the second part was, we haven't really talked a lot about the military side of things, and if you could provide more color on what your goals, your targets, and that vertical would be really
You want to start?
No, it's all you.
So let me start by first saying what we're looking at with the kind of the changing landscape in the military, both in terms of their needs as well as the sourcing practices, how they're going out to the market to bring in more commercially or advanced tech into military much faster. So with that environment, what we're looking at are what are applications where the technologies we have, we think would be natural fits. And probably the two obvious or the most natural areas, one are unmanned autonomous vehicles, where we have perception, we have actually a self-driving stack back from my Bayo's DARPA challenge days. So it's still very, very valid. And we have to basically stitch together the other sensing modalities. And so we've talked a lot about how you do that, sensor fusion and all of that. And so that's one area that we're basically exploring right now. The other area is in drones. Obviously, just over the last, I would say 3 to 5 years, massive expansion of what drones are doing, both fixed wing as well as multi-motor drones. And what's interesting there is whether it's surveying, mapping, detection, these types of things, the sensors that we make are also a good fit there. You have to repackage, of course, lightweight, do that kind of thing. But high durability, solid state sensors are a really good application for basically putting as a drone payload. And so those are the two areas that we're exploring now to understand, okay, what problems can we solve? Start with what problems need to be solved. How can Microvision bring technology together to uniquely solve those. Unmanned autonomous vehicles, drones look like two really, really good avenues. We'll explore others. Yeah, and well, you could, it's not necessarily 360 with the same fidelity of all 360. If you think about looking down, you want, basically, you need a lot of fidelity looking down. You just want collision avoidance looking up. You're not trying to localize by looking at the stars or features above you. You're trying to localize. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So.
How many times are you guys working with on that, or about?
We haven't talked about the go-to-market strategy yet, right? So when we come back, we'll talk about that then.
And if I can add one more thing, because obviously that's the technological solution. Why defense tech and why now? Because I think that's an important question to answer as well. What we're seeing in the market is an increased number of eyeballs of a lot of defense tech investors investing in this space. Case in point, I believe that, for example, Anduril just raised valuations north of $30 billion, raised a lot of money. Why that's a very important benchmark for all of us or anybody who's interested in defense tech, I call it almost the Luminar moment, where 5 years ago, a lot of companies or a lot of investors were focused on the LiDAR sector, and hence you had so many players de-SPACing in that particular space. We are seeing similar patterns in this industry, because obviously what's happening across the pond in Europe and all the increased spending in the military as well, that is also sort of reinvigorating the interest of a lot of VCs and private equity investors as well, looking to pour money in this sector. And I think that's sort of the strategic angle that why defense tech, why now? Because I think I want to very clearly differentiate what Glenn described is the solutions that we're working on. So that's one aspect. And the existing aspect is the AR solutions that already exist. Yeah. So we're trying to monetize the both angles, or go at this sector from both perspectives as to how you can take advantage of this macroeconomic landscape that we are in.
Yeah. We identify the primes that would be our best partners.
Adam, like I said, I think at this point we can't comment that we're in particular discussions with XYZ people. That's what the whole point of bringing a whole defense council on is to advise and have a very targeted and a focused strategy to take advantage of this moment.
Yeah, you guys have surfaced a name, so you want it, but maybe there's better options, right? So what we care about, what you all care about, is that we're looking at everything from what's the highest shareholder value we can get. But we have some tech. It's been proven out. A big military contract was done in there, so the proof point exists. So that's not what we're struggling with anymore.
But to approach the defense sector, do you have to do it through a partnership, or can we go it alone?
Well, we believe that ultimately, it's going to start off with the part like again, walk, crawl, run. I mean, crawl, walk, run, right? You start with something small you do as a demo, right? And then you would have to have, as a subprime, a partnership, right? Enable. And perhaps in the future, you could do something bigger directly. But you promote yourself of like all the problems you can solve directly to them.
I just want to say, I'm sorry, but it's getting close to 1 o'clock, so we just have a few more minutes left, some more questions. After we're done here, this session will be over. There is lunch outside, just outside this door. You're all welcome to take part in that.
Okay.
So, just a few more questions.
Yeah, I think you had, yeah.
What's your confidence level that we'll succeed and succeed wildly?
That we're going to succeed. I didn't hear the second.
And succeed wildly.
You're asking the guy that is always the most optimistic, right? I mean, so
I think
there's nothing that will stand in our way. If there's persistent, one thing in life is, you have to be persistent. It does not matter what happens. What we do, I believe in the hard work that everybody does, right? I think it is inevitable. I think, the most senior person in the company from an experience standpoint in business saying it is inevitable, right? The rest is just hardcore persistence. Watch what you spend. Build trust everywhere you go. It's not just in this room, everywhere you go, right? And just stay persistent and consistent, and it will happen. Yeah.
Do you see Mosaic helping in the defense side? Do you see it helping in the industrial side? And can you maybe add a little color? The other thing I wanted to point out, and I'm not sure everyone understands this, is that the value that's added by not using radar, not using video or cameras and such, is the amount of power that's I know it really helps us validate, obviously, work. It helps the development team test. It helps the customers understand what they're going to get. Is there any more that you guys can add to that?
Yeah.
No, I think just to confirm, it'll be used wherever we're developing a LiDAR product and the LiDAR-based systems. And it'll get expanded to include the other sensing modalities, no question about it. And as customers adopt our products, they can then has the opportunity to actually be used by customers as a development tool for them as well. But no, it absolutely is. Your point about power is also really, really key, and that's where, especially when you're talking about lightweighting like drones or things like this, where power consumption, especially something working off battery, power consumption is really critical. It's really critical in automotive too as well, in terms of where you package the sensor. If the sensor is dissipating a lot of power, it creates a big packaging problem for the OEMs. So it's really critical for us to be just super efficient, and MOVIA L is fantastic because it operates at sub 7 watts. I mean, it's way below what the competitors are doing. And so that means I can put it in places that I don't have to provide active cooling to it. I don't have to do those kind of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what, yes.
Yep.
Sensor
So
model.
let's not argue about range and resolution. This is that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. That means you can package that in areas where it's not going to burn up, and it can operate at higher elevated temperatures. It can, so it really is, that low power operation is really critical.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I don't know if you can answer this question. Drew might be part of it. If not,
That's not a good start to your question, Ty.
I wanted to forewarn you, right? I didn't want you to come out of the blue. And I've chosen my words carefully.
Sure.
I think you can answer it. Is it your personal expectation, keyword, that you will close an industrial deal before September?
Yeah. My personal expectation is I believe that, we're going to get it done. Yes, ma'am.
Can I piggyback on his question? I feel like there's a missed opportunity when you have the technology on forklifts. So being a person that has some experience working.
Can't hear the question. Sorry.
Okay, I'm not done. But being a person that have experience both in manufacturing and working on the ramp at the airport, there is a much higher injury rate with those tugs. And I feel like that technology that you can
Yeah.
use on that forklift could also be put on those tugs.
Yeah.
And those tugs hit an airplane, it's not like $1 million scratch. It is a multi-million-dollar.
Yeah.
I'm going to add something. So I actually spoke to somebody 3 weeks ago about exactly that. Okay? And what this person was advising me, and she was telling me that your problem is not your tech. You probably can do everything you're saying. Is that ecosystem is so hard to break in. So she was saying, you need to really go talk to, just introduce yourself as a company. It's a long cycle. You got to talk to these guys at Delta, these guys at United, because, that ecosystem is not as simple as hey, look what I got. I go to a trade show and, they pick you up. You really have to start with a very high level partnership or introduction. Yeah. Yeah, I think I think our intention is once we start showing something, again, we're judicious about where we spend the money, something really valuable we can show in the military. And again, saying, hey, it's just a skip and a jump to get to other applications, right? But the first set of customers start coming to the application that he's talking about, right? Because that's a faster path to get people engaged. Our crawling part, of course, is at that point some public prototype is up and running. We're expanding. But now we can say, okay, but that same thing, just like the forklift, that's not the only application. That same core we show to other people that may be doing a derivative of that, right? So.
But you're exactly right. And it's ports, it's closed yards, it's distribution centers and hubs, it's airports. That concept where the sensor is able to provide not just the point cloud, but the full functionality in a bolt-on manner, it has great applications for exactly what you're describing, where it can stop the vehicle before it makes contact with another vehicle, a person, or in worst case, your plane. I know I've been in a plane that got hit by a truck.
Right, so the accident that happened over the weekend with two Alaska Airlines, where the wingtip was a result of the tugs
It's an expensive mistake.
Ooh.
Well, not to mention the fact that every time a tug hits somebody at an airport, whether it's a worker or a person, that results in multi-million-dollar losses.
Yeah.
And if you think about, when we use the word ADAS, right, it's so connected with automotive, right? But again, it's about creating awareness, a low-level awareness on all these devices where, they are kind of like, adding more smarts and they're more robotic. They know what the safety, structure has to be. So I think it's.
All the more reason why, when we do get that first industrial deal done,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk about it loudly.
Of course, absolutely.
Of course,
yeah.
yep.
Oh,
We believe
for sure.
So. Yeah. Okay. All right. Last one, right, Drew? Okay, last one, please.
First of all, welcome to the company, Glenn.
Oh, thank you.
Excited to have you on board. I didn't get a chance to talk to you earlier, but I just wanted to let you know that. Half serious, half humorous. You mentioned that the automotive OEMs are going through a training and education phase on what they want. Do you have any insights or guesstimates as when they might graduate?
Well, I can guess. I'm not going to tell you I'll be right. No, in talking with OEMs even as recently as a couple weeks ago, they're still looking at kind of the next generation of system out in the 28, 29 timeframe. They like to get something pre-30. I think, the OEMs are dealing with a lot of dynamics right now in the marketplace. Tariffs have been a massive distraction, so that it's because of the cost implications associated with that. So that's been all-consuming. There's a lot of discussion about, the OEM struggle implementing the software-defined vehicle and the architectures, so they're kind of retrenching on vehicle architecture. The slowdown of electrification has created a bunch of problems. They have to adjust plans for ICE-based platforms. So you're seeing a lot of churn happening now, and but that pressure, and we referred to it earlier, Chinese, just the market pressure, Tesla, you name it, they are still looking for the solutions, and which is why I believe it's kind of a unique selling opportunity right now where you can bring a solution to an OEM. I can lower their total system costs, I can increase functionality. I know that will drive a lot of attention and a lot of interest from them.
Is that pre-30 implementation?
Yeah.
I was thinking more when they're going to get off their butts and actually sign a deal with someone.
Well, I can tell you, in our discussions, they want to, in a lot of respects, they're still trying to figure out what the right requirement set is. I mean, it's back to that level of what spec do we need to actually put out there, and then how much does it cost? And so when you look at that tends to say more 30. I think that's where we can be helpful. We can help them accelerate those plans. Say, look, I can give you a system that can do what you need it to do, and we'll write the spec around that.
So we just talked about the tier ones kind of being out of LiDAR, bad experiences. Did you say they're still out? Or?
And I say this as a tier one that had invested in LiDAR. I think for a tier one, what they're looking at is, they're looking at like everybody. Do I need to buy a LiDAR company or own that technology, or can I partner to get it? And with the number of players out there today, they don't need to acquire it to win the business. So, and that's kind of the current state of play for the tier ones. Now, that can change. Tier ones vertically integrate on occasion. I mean, when I was part of Aptiv, we were always looking at what technologies do we want to invest in. LiDAR and camera systems, and that we said we'll partner. Radar is what we vertically integrated and invested in. But they're always looking at how do they capture more value and the ability to provide better solutions to their customers. So, I mean, that's always an open question.
And with that, I'm sorry, but we'll have to call it a day. Thank you all very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, we certainly appreciate all of you and interest in the company, and we appreciate you guys coming here actually, because coming and just talking to us, right? We actually appreciate you a lot. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.